Chapter 497. Although that ripple was very weak, it was very clear. It was definitely the ripple of true essence. What did this mean? This meant that Jushio's meridian had already been reconnected. Although it could not be said to be completely repaired, it could at least allow true essence to slowly flow through it. And as long as true essence began to flow, the meridian would automatically repair itself at a much faster rate. What was 3 years? Perhaps it wouldn't even need 30 days for that meridian to be as good as new. What's going on here? Qin Changsheng thought in shock as he looked at Jushio. Their eyes met. He knew that Jushio had already sensed the recovery of his meridian. It had nothing to do with treatment or medicine. It had taken countless times less time than he had estimated, so it could only be said that Jushio had done it himself. The question was, how had he done it? Pain. Jushio looked into his eyes and said, "It can stimulate one's life force. The greater the pain, the more life force can be stimulated, as long as you can clearly endure that pain." Qin Changsheng was very shocked. For a long time, he could not speak. Deep in the night, the lights of the Orthodox Academy gradually extinguished, and the starlight in the garden grew even brighter. Qin Changsheng stood in front of the window, silently gazing at the silver surface of the lake. Normally, he would have fallen asleep long ago, but today he did not. The ruthless will Jushio had displayed made him vaguely understand something. He sat cross-legged in front of the window, began to meditate, and then entered the sheath. Unlike in the past, this time he did not separate a strand of his spiritual sense into the sheath. Instead, he sent all his spiritual sense into the sheath. He knew that this was a very dangerous matter and that he would have to endure a great deal of pain. Moreover, if his spiritual sense was shattered by the phantom of the black monolith, he would very likely be heavily injured. But he did not want to wait any longer. He had to enter the Garden of Zhou and take a look. The sheath was called the Vault Sheath. The countless sharp sword intents within combined to form a dangerous sea. In the past, when his spiritual sense passed through this sea of swords, it would cause a violent storm and a perilous wave. Not to mention that he had sent all his spiritual sense in today. The sea of sword intents responded and instantly began to roar and rage. It was very painful, really very painful. His divine sense kept breaking through the mountain-like waves or sinking into the ice-cold bottom of the sea. After an unknown amount of time, he finally succeeded in reaching the other side of the sea of swords and saw the shadow of the black stone tablet. This seemed simple, but in fact, it was extremely dangerous. If it weren't for the fact that his spiritual sense had just been cleansed by that drop of tea, making it more agile and full of vitality than before, perhaps he would have been directly swallowed by this vast ocean long ago. Even so, there were several times along the way when he almost gave up because of the pain. It was just that when he was prepared to give up, he thought of Jushio, thought of how he had held up the umbrella of 10,000 swords at the summit of the mausoleum of Zhou to support his fall from the sky. He clenched his teeth and endured. Tonight, it was all of his divine senses that had reached the other side of the sea of swords. Thus, it could be understood that he had arrived at the other side of the sea of swords and was standing before the black stone tablet. When his gaze fell on the shadow of the black stone tablet, his divine sense also followed suit. Last time, his divine sense could already penetrate deep into the shadow of the black stone tablet, but could not penetrate it, so he could only vaguely see some scenes behind it. This time was the same. He saw the somewhat dusky cliffs of Sunset Valley, saw the ruins of the mountainside Whispering Wood, saw the small lakes that seemed to have dried up like scars, and also saw that grassland. The grassland seemed lifeless. The green reeds and the white frost grass were like large patches of color, cut apart by the ravines formed by the cracks in the ground. Just when he believed that the monsters had all fled the grassland and gone to some unknown place, he suddenly noticed a large black dot in the northwest. With a thought, he arrived in the sky over there. On the grassland, at least several tens of thousands of monsters were currently slowly advancing towards the distant mausoleum. They lowered their heads and panted heavily, saliva dripping from the corners of their mouths. The wounds on their bodies suffused with the smell of decay. and they looked like they could die at any moment. Suddenly, the black monster tide stopped. A figure the size of a small mountain slowly stood up. It was the massive, mountain-toppling fiend, and it looked toward the sky. The several tens of thousands of monsters followed its gaze and looked towards the sky. They all felt as if there was something watching them, but they could not see anything. After an unknown period of time, the eyes of the demon beasts revealed an expression of despair, and they let out painful whimpers. If the gods were really looking down on us from the sky, why didn't they come to save us? Why did they have the heart to watch us walk into a hopeless situation? The monsters did not go mad from despair, because the monsters that had gone mad had already killed each other in the past few days. The remaining monsters were all exhausted to the extreme and had already given up on the hope of survival. They only wanted to return to the place where they had lived for generations, and then sink into eternal sleep with the master of the mausoleum. Chun Changsheng withdrew his gaze and looked towards the surface of the black monolith. The shadow of the black monolith was no different from the black monolith, except that it did not have a physical body. It was a complete projection of the real thing. He looked at the complicated and incomprehensible lines on the surface of the monolith, and pondered the problem of how to pass through it. If these lines fell into the eyes of a normal person, they would be heavenly tones. No matter how they looked, they would not be able to understand them, and it was even more impossible to analyze any sort of pattern from them. This was because this black monolith had always been a heavenly tone monolith. Chun Changsheng had seen many heavenly tone monoliths, so he was extremely familiar with the lines on the surface of the monolith. He knew how he should look at them. His gaze fell on the lines and moved with them. It was as if he had returned to the monolith hut in the heavenly tomes, sitting under the tree for countless days and nights. Those lines were the trajectories of the stars, the source or symbol of all changes in fate. It was as if he had returned to the wilderness in the north of Tianliang County, raising his head to look at the starry sky by the stream. That was the first day after Su Li had passed on the intellectual sword to him. He was very clear that his ability to calculate and calculate was not enough to grasp the intellectual sword, so he used another method. He used the method of comprehending the heavenly tone monoliths to display the intellectual sword. Even Su Li probably would not have thought that he could do such a thing. But now, he wanted to reverse everything. He wanted to use the intellectual sword to comprehend the heavenly tone monoliths. It was not the understanding he had obtained when viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books, but to break them. He wanted to find the path in those lines on the surface of the black monolith, wanted to find the divine kingdom through the trajectories of the stars, wanted to see the truth in the illusory fate, and then use his sword to break it. After some time, he closed his eyes. After some more time, he opened his eyes and thrust his sword at the surface of the black monolith. His spiritual sense was currently in the sheath, his body outside the sheath. His sword was in the sheath, but it was not in the sheath. But when he attacked, the stainless sword responded to his thoughts and appeared in his hand. The stainless sword pierced through the air and landed on the black monolith. It had clearly stabbed at the intersection of several lines, but for some reason, when the tip of the sword touched the monolith, it struck an empty space. There was a light pop, like a bubble on a pond being popped by a naughty frog. With a boom, the sea of sword intent behind him stirred up a massive wave that soared to the heavens. The surface of the black monolith in front of him rapidly faded, then transformed into a pure white. That was the light. It was also the sky. He drew back his gaze from the sky and lowered his head to look at the grassland around him. He saw the 3 distant mountain ranges, saw the desolate grass in the wilderness. A cold wind whistled by, ruffling his clothes. This was the Garden of Zhou. He stood at the place closest to the sky in the Garden of Zhou, and also furthest from ground. He stood at the peak of the mausoleum of Zhou. The early mornings of the Orthodox Academy were no longer as peaceful as they used to be. It was a little better in the separate garden. Zhixiu was resting on his bed, and although Tang 36 was much more diligent than before, he still could not wake up at 5 o'clock. Xin Yuan circled around from the kitchen on the other side of the lake and came to the house. He called out to a window, "Chen Changsheng, come down and eat." Previously on the other side of the lake, he had seen very clearly that Chun Changsheng was in front of that window, so he knew that it was already 5 o'clock. The Orthodox Academy had never needed a device to measure time, and Chun Changsheng was one. There was no reply from that window. Xin Yuanpo waved the fat blue lobster in his hand and yelled, "This is a spicy lobster. It's very delicious when paired with white steam buns. I left one especially for you. Hurry up and come down, or else if Tang 36 hears this, he'll come and steal it from us again." There was still no reply. Xin Yuanpo was somewhat depressed. He ran up the stairs and pushed open Chen Changsheng's door. He said, "Brushing your teeth shouldn't take that long." There was no reply because there was no one in the room. The window was open, and the morning wind blew in, lifting up a corner of the bedsheet. Chen Changsheng looked at the stainless sword in his right hand and confirmed that the sword was real. Then he confirmed that he was real. This meant that he had truly entered the Garden of Zhou, or in other words, he had rediscovered the Garden of Zhou. The image of the black monolith now seemed to be the path that led to Zhou Tong, and the original body of the black monolith was the key to the Garden of Zhou. He remembered very clearly that when he left the Garden of Zhou, the sky was collapsing. Amongst the miniature worlds discovered by humans, the Garden of Zhou was the most stable and also the largest. However, it was still a fragment of space, so it was naturally not as sturdy as the world of the origin. Therefore, whether it was him or Zhu Luo and Mei Lisha outside Hanqiu City, they all believed that the Garden of Zhou had definitely been destroyed. Who could have imagined that the Garden of Zhou still existed, that it had actually re-established its laws, that it had managed to stabilize after much difficulty? Only a very large change had already occurred. It had not actually been that long since he had left the Garden of Zhou, definitely less than half a year, but the Garden of Zhou had already become extremely different. This world had become much more barren and dilapidated. Perhaps because of that world-shaking calamity, the ground was covered in cracks. The water in the sea of grass had become very turbid, and the distant cliffs were filled with signs of collapse. The mountain springs had dried up, and many small lakes had already dried up. The earth was a scene of desolation, and the green forest was covered in dust. It was a very desolate sight. Within the sea of grass, the cries of those insects could no longer be heard. The roots of the grass were already on the verge of necrosis, so there was naturally no school of fish to be seen either. As far as the eye could see, there were only a few fish flipping their bellies, weakly spitting out bubbles. Even the sun in the sky, or perhaps its halo, had now become somewhat dusky. Because I was preparing to leave tomorrow, I forgot to update. Today is the last chapter. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, I strongly and earnestly recommend my good friend, my good sister Sandbag's new book, Heavenly Heart of the Martial Path. Many famous authors and platinum authors have earnestly offered their opinions, and they have shamelessly boasted about it. However, the truth is that this book is very good. The updated record is excellent, and it has never been broken, just like me recently. I sincerely invite everyone to taste it. Thank you. Chapter 498. This place was the plains of the unsetting sun. The sun had always been somewhat different, but now it had become much darker. It was not that there was a problem with the sun itself, but that the space it was in had a problem that was very difficult to describe with words. It was very difficult to describe, so it was naturally even more difficult to understand. However, for some reason, just by looking around, Chun Changsheng understood why the Garden of Zhou had become like this. The Garden of Zhou had gradually become desolate. Of course, it had something to do with the natural disaster caused by the breaking of the laws. The reason that the Garden of Zhou had not been able to repair itself after the re-establishment of the laws was because the Garden of Zhou had been isolated from the source world for these past few days. Yes, the Garden of Zhou was a miniature world, a fragment that floated in the river of time and space. However, it was assuredly connected to the source world, or else it would not have appeared after Zhou Dufu's death, following a certain pattern. Chun Changsheng knew why the Garden of Zhou appeared once every 10 years. It was because it needed to communicate with the source world. Only running water could not rot. Although the Garden of Zhou was large, if it was truly isolated, it would become a pool of stagnant water. Even if this pool was as large as the ocean, it would still become lifeless. Standing at the very peak of the mausoleum of Zhou, Chen Changsheng looked around. He could faintly sense some sort of connection, and judged that with his arrival, the Garden of Zhou had re-established its connection with the source world. This situation would probably change, but it was assuredly a very slow and long process. He also did not know if the creatures that lived in this world could still endure until that day. The monster tide in the sea of grass was no longer as majestic as it was in the past. Several tens of thousands of monsters seemed like a lot, but on the surface of the vast and boundless sea of grass, it seemed very few. The several tens of thousands of monsters set off once more, heading towards the mausoleum of Zhou. They were prepared to welcome the end of their lives there. However, in the next moment, they once again felt that feeling of being looked down upon. This time, that feeling did not come from the distant sky, but from the mausoleum of Zhou in front of them. Moreover, this time, that qi was much stronger. Some of the monsters that were slightly more intelligent could even tell that they had smelled that qi before. The mountain-toppling fiend stopped and straightened its body, which was several dozen zhang high. It gazed at the mausoleum in the distance, and its bean-like eyes were gradually filled with a ruthless aura. With a whoosh, the heavily injured earth monkey appeared out of nowhere. Grabbing onto the mountain-toppling fiend's fur, it used only its two hands to climb onto its shoulders like a bolt of lightning. It gave a mournful howl towards the distant mausoleum of Zhou, brimming with anger, resentment, and despair. At the very back of the monster tide, the monster bull had its eyes closed, its damaged ears faintly trembling in the cold wind. From the earth monkey's howl, it was able to confirm the origin of that qi. Its body began to tremble uncontrollably. Ripples began to appear on the surface of its body, which had become mottled and ugly due to the loss of too many arrow hairs. It was like a moist swamp that had completely evaporated but was still wet. These three great demonic beasts had suffered heavy injuries in the reappearance of the sword pool last time, but they were still incomparably powerful and savage. They had actually luckily survived such a natural disaster. Of course, they could tell that the qi belonged to that human youth, the main culprit that had turned the Garden of Zhou into its current state. To these monsters, the Garden of Zhou was their home. They had lived here peacefully for countless years, but they had been disturbed by the hateful humans and demons, even falling into their current hopeless situation. The sky had fallen, the humans and demons had all left, but they still had to live on these plains. What could they do? The hatred that the monsters had for Chen Changsheng was naturally something very easy to understand. However, for some reason, in the next moment, the earth monkey's howl came to a sudden stop. It stared in the direction of the mausoleum of Zhou, its eyes filled with disbelief. Soon after, a timid expression appeared. Noiselessly, it moved closer to the mountain-toppling fiend's ear and muttered a few words. Afterwards, it hid its damaged half of its body in the horn on the mountain-toppling fiend's head, no longer daring to show its head. The monster bull at the back of the monster tide also calmed down. It slightly tilted its head, then let out a deep and resounding howl. The mountain-toppling fiend looked in the direction of the mausoleum of Zhou. After a moment of silence, it knelt down. Thus, the tens of thousands of monsters all bent their forelimbs or lowered their heads, closed their eyes brimming with ruthlessness and exhaustion, and knelt down. This was submission and also a welcome. Submission to the person who could bring new life to the Garden of Zhou, a welcome to the new master of the Garden of Zhou. In a certain part of the Sea of Grass, Chen Changsheng gazed at the two great monsters kneeling in front of him, not knowing how to react. Even though it was kneeling, the mountain-toppling fiend was still like a mountain, and the monster bull was the same. Compared to them, he seemed so insignificant. If he had not met the Black Dragon under New North Bridge so many times and been in the same situation so many times, even if he now understood the situation of the Garden of Zhou like the back of his hand, he probably would have had the urge to immediately flee. Back then, He and she had encountered many dangers in this sea of grass. In the end, the mausoleum of Zhou had been surrounded by the monster tide. These three incomparably powerful and abnormally sinister and terrifying monsters had once brought them countless troubles. If the sword pool had not reappeared, there would have been no need for Nank and the young golden-winged Great Pong to fuse their souls. He would have been easily killed by these three monsters and then eaten. I know the current situation of the Garden of Zhou. Qin Changsheng looked at the two eyes hidden in the shadows of the mountain-toppling fiend's horns and knew that they were assuredly that most sinister of earth monkeys. I can help resolve a few problems. Hearing these words, the mountain-toppling fiend knelt even more thoroughly, and the monster bull also appeared even more humble. The dense mass of monsters behind the two great monsters were even more unbearable. The flood serpents rolled their bodies, and the gray vultures let out unpleasant screeches. They used every method they could think of to display their obedience and meekness. In reality, none of the monsters that were still alive were of the benevolent sort. They were all the most powerful and most dangerous monsters. Seeing this sight, Qin Changsheng felt rather strange. He took out all the medicines that he usually carried with him and threw them in front of the mountain-toppling fiend and the monster bull. He then glanced at the two eyes hidden in the shadows of the mountain-toppling fiend's horns and said, "Those with heavy injuries can eat first." The two eyes in the mountain-toppling fiend's horns rolled around, seemingly thinking of something. "I didn't bring enough medicine, so you must distribute it according to the method I mentioned just now." He no longer looked at the two eyes, but raised his head to look at the mountain-toppling fiend. "I have urgent matters to attend to right now, so I must leave first. Tomorrow, I will return at this time, but if I discover that someone is not listening to me, I will not return." Hearing these words, the mountain-toppling fiend lightly placed its thick and solid arms on the ground, expressing its obedience. Its black-furred palms were spread out towards the sky, seeming like two black forests. With this action, its horns also touched the ground. Because the earth monkey's body was incomplete, it could not stand steadily. Just like that, it rolled out, rolling right in front of Qin Changsheng. It was very obvious that the mountain-toppling fiend had done this on purpose. The earth monkey did not even dare to raise its head. It incessantly kissed the muddy water in front of Qin Changsheng's boots, at the same time letting out whimpering sounds. It seemed especially pitiful. Qin Changsheng knew that it was pretending, but he did not care. Shaking his head, he began to walk towards the edge of the plain. He was keenly aware that these monsters were not of the good sort. Although they appeared especially obedient and submissive, they were actually all extremely savage. But he still wanted to help them. The heavens were virtuous, and he cherished life more than anyone else. He was also not worried about whether or not these monsters would turn on him once they were rescued and grew stronger again. This was because he was currently the master of the Garden of Zhou. If he did not open the Garden of Zhou, this miniature world would eventually descend into silence. No matter how powerful the beings that lived within it were, only death awaited them. To put another way, the Garden of Zhou was his pasture, and these monsters were his livestock. If the livestock were sick or hungry, as their master, he naturally had to take care of them. Moreover, a powerful monster like the monster bull had long since developed a rudimentary intelligence. He could not view it as livestock, nor did he want to see it die. Moreover, the Garden of Zhou had a very important meaning to him. He did not wish for the Garden of Zhou to become deathly still. He wished for the Garden of Zhou to continue living, just like he wished for her to continue living. The old rules of the Garden of Zhou had already been broken, and the spatial barrier of the plains of the unsetting sun had also vanished without a trace. After becoming the new master of the Garden of Zhou, a portion of the new rules of the Garden of Zhou had entered his mind through an incomprehensible method. Afterwards, he grasped a portion of the rules that he could understand with his current level of strength. As his cultivation and strength continued to rise, this miniature world would reveal even more of its rules to him. On the contrary, understanding these rules would also be extremely helpful to his cultivation and strength. Because of this grasp of the rules, he only needed a very short amount of time to walk out of the plains of the unsetting sun, traverse over several mountains, and arrive at the courtyard at the edge of the Garden of Zhou. This was the mountainside whispering wood, the place where the human cultivators had gathered the most, and it was also the place where he had seen the great Peng fly her. The once winding corridors and small pavilions were now dilapidated walls and dilapidated walls. Everywhere was lifeless, and there were no croaks, only the cries of birds from very far away. This proved that this was not a true kingdom of the dead. But many people had already died here. The collapsed cliffs had completely buried the most beautiful buildings of the mountainside whispering wood. Incomparably heavy boulders were piled up from the col all the way to the waist of the mountain. Seeing this terrifying sight, Chun Chongsheng said nothing. He could not move these boulders, but he could clearly sense that beneath the collapsed cliffs there were many dead people. He stood in front of the collapsed cliffs for a very long time, and then he left. Afterwards, he went to the other two gardens, but he did not find anything. He went to the mountain stream and went upstream to look at the cold pool. There was no longer any sword intent in the pool, nor was there anyone. There was also no one in the lake on the other side of the pool. In the depths of the lake, he could faintly make out the light of the night illumination lamp. Chun Chongsheng did not take those treasures or silvery white. Nor did he take those books that had been immersed in the lake water for so many days, but had miraculously not decayed. He only took an object wrapped in cloth. There was also no one on the lakeshore. There were still some blackened bloodstains in the sand, but he didn't know which had been left behind by Qi Jian or which had been left behind by Zhu Xiu. Then he swam from the bottom of the lake into the distance, arriving at the small lake in front of Sunset Valley. The water of this small lake had already flowed through the cracks in the ground to some unknown place, leaving only the dried-up bottom. Back then, he had broken out of the lake here and been saved by her. There was also no one here. Today is the first day of the second year of choosing heaven's path. Thank you, everyone, for your company this year. Today is also the first day of my journey south with my leader. Unlike Qin Changsheng and Su Li, we are not riding furry deer. We're driving our own cars, but the journey is also very long, over 2,000 kilometers. I hope that everything will go smoothly. For this vacation, I made many preparations this month. While maintaining 2 chapters, I also worked hard to accumulate manuscripts. I truly did quite well. I once said to everyone that I would strive for 2 chapters until the 25th, and I did. However, I feel that this sort of day is very refreshing. So I decided to hold on to 2 chapters for a few more days. The manuscripts will inevitably run out, and as for what to do when that time comes, whatever, let's first enjoy ourselves before thinking about it. Let's happily read books and drive cars to enjoy the beautiful scenery of our motherland. Chapter 499. Chun Changsheng walked for a while in the wetlands on the outskirts of the plain. He glanced at the island of reeds, then went to the cave. In the deepest part of the cave, he saw the remains of the elder from the Triple Yang sect that had already been eaten clean by the horde of beasts. Afterwards, he went to the sunset ridge. He slowly walked along the white stone path in the mountains and arrived under a wudong tree. He did not know that he would come under this wudong tree. He just followed that feeling. But there was also no one here. There was no one in the Garden of Zhou. Not a single person. Finally, he returned to the mausoleum of Zhou. The majestic mausoleum was still as insufferably arrogant in the world. The heavenly tome monoliths around the mausoleum had long since lost their violent and terrifying qi. They had become extremely calm. The lines on their surface, perhaps filled up by the sandstorms of the past few days or obliterated, had already disappeared. It was as if they had returned to their original stone pillars. The black monolith was the same. The surface of the monolith was smooth. Chun Changsheng placed his hand on it. From the distant plain, behind him came the low howls of monsters. It was a farewell, but also an unease and a begging. It was a farewell to the departure of the new master of the Garden of Zhou. It was uneasy as to whether or not he would return, and it begged for his grace to descend even faster. There was darkness, and then there was light. Chun Changsheng opened his eyes and discovered that he was still in his room, still in front of the window. Nothing had changed from before. It was just that it was already noon. The sun hung in the azure sky. No matter how hard the shade of the trees in the Orthodox Academy tried, they could not stop the blazing rays of light from descending. The light he saw was this sunlight. Then he noticed that a string of beads had appeared on his wrist. No matter how he looked at it, these beads were made from the most ordinary of stones. There were no decorations on their surfaces, nor did they emit any chi. Moreover, their surfaces could not even be described as smooth. He did not know that when he struck Zhu Luo with his sword in Xuanyang City, this string of stone beads had also appeared on his wrist. These stone beads were formed from heavenly tone monoliths. This was because this string of stone beads had a total of 11 beads. 10 were gray and 1 was black. Back then, Zhou Dufu might have taken 12 heavenly tone monoliths from the Mausoleum of Books. Later on, he and she only saw 10 monoliths in the Mausoleum of Zhou, as well as the base of a broken monolith. It was precisely because one heavenly tone monolith was missing, and he had also taken away the sword pool that replaced the heavenly tone monolith, that the array of the Mausoleum of Zhou had a problem. Only when he remembered that he had a black stone on him did he realize. He had obtained that black stone from the Pavilion of Ascending Mist, and it was actually also a heavenly tone monolith. When that black stone from Wang Jitsa truly became a heavenly tone monolith and helped stabilize the heavenly tone monolith array around the Mausoleum of Zhou, he had originally believed that the black stone was a heavenly tone monolith that Wang Jitsa had taken from the Garden of Zhou. However, after leaving the Garden of Zhou and recalling the notebook he had seen in the Pavilion of Ascending Mist, he felt that his conjecture might not have been accurate. No matter where those 2 heavenly tone monoliths went, the stone pearls on his wrist were heavenly tone monoliths. Of course, it was not only because these 11 stone pearls, 10 gray and 1 black, just happened to correspond with the heavenly tone monoliths around the Mausoleum of Zhou. It was also because only he could sense certain things through the black stone. He could sense very clearly that the Garden of Zhou was within the black stone. This statement was not accurate. It should be said that the black stone was the new gate to the Garden of Zhou, and the key to opening the Garden of Zhou was his spiritual sense. He subconsciously raised his hand, facing the sunlight shining through the window, and earnestly gazed at the string of stone pearls. Bright rays of light seeped through the cracks in the stone pearls, changing into many different angles. In some fine places, it seemed like there was a rainbow inside. Only now did he truly understand what had happened. The heavenly tone monoliths that were incomparably divine in the eyes of the common people, the source of all Taoist techniques, were actually worn on his hand. Moreover, there were 11 of them. The sunlight shining on the stone pearls, shooting into his eyes, causing him to be somewhat dazed. He felt that everything was not real. At this moment, the door to the room was pushed open. He turned his head and saw Tang 36 and Xin Yuan Per. Just where did that idiot go? How should I know? Her Highness, Sir Luo Luo, wanted me to keep an eye on him, but in the end, he just ran off without saying anything. How could I keep an eye on him? Xin Yuan Per said pitifully. Then together with Tang 36, they saw Chun Changsheng's figure. After a moment of silence, Tang 36 patted his chest and said with some lingering fear, "Good, good. I won't ask where you went, as long as you didn't run away." Chun Changsheng asked confusedly, "Why would I run away? You disappeared for half a day, for no reason." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "We were all wondering if it was because you heard that Su Yu Ron was coming back and you were afraid that you would be beaten black and blue by your fiancée. So you ran away." Xin Yuan Per waved his hand and said, "I didn't say that." Tang 36 looked at him and sneered. "You dare to say that you didn't think that?" Xin Yuan Per was a very honest child of the bear tribe. Hearing this question, he mumbled for a long time but couldn't say anything. Chun Changsheng was a little startled and said, "Just mentioning her reminded me of something. Which one of you can help me write a letter to the Divine General of the East Estate?" Tang 36 said in surprise, "Son-in-law with clay feet coming to visit? His daughter hasn't even returned yet. What are you in such a hurry for?" Chun Changsheng shook his head and said, "I want to pay a visit tonight. There are some things I want to talk about." You can't really be afraid of Su Yurong and want to do something outside of the game, right? Tang 36 became interested and said, "You should ask me first for this kind of thing. You know that I'm the best at this kind of thing." Chen Changsheng smiled and ignored him. He walked towards the door and said, "I'll go eat first." A few days ago, Luluo told him that she confirmed that the girl did not leave the Garden of Zhou alive. He said that he would go to the Divine General of the East Estate to break off the engagement, because this was what he had promised her in the Garden of Zhou. Since she was no longer here, he obviously had to keep it. The reason why he did not go to the Divine General of the East Estate these days was because he had been rather busy recently. He had left an important and necessary item in the Garden of Zhou. At the same time, his heart still held on to one last ray of hope. She did not leave the Garden of Zhou, or perhaps she was still in the Garden of Zhou. Since the Garden of Zhou was not destroyed, then there was a possibility that she was still alive. Until last night and this morning, he finally re-entered the Garden of Zhou. He discovered that there was not a single person inside. Not a single person, not that person. Thus, his last hope was also gone. He also conveniently brought that item out. Seeing Chen Changsheng's back disappear through the door, Tang 36 was silent for a while and asked, "Don't you feel that he was a bit strange today?" Xin Yuanpa asked in confusion, "What's strange?" Tang 36 said, "His smile was a bit strange, very ugly." Xin Yuanpa thought for a while and nodded his head. Yes, he smiled like he was crying. Chapter 500. For the twilight to completely ignite the clouds on the horizon. It would still take a very long time, but the banquets in the restaurants and brothels of the capital had already begun. Formal banquets always took a very long time, so they would naturally begin very early. This had nothing to do with saving on oil or candles. Shoshing experts and nobles, scholars and literati, young ladies and maids, paid more attention to the changes in light from dawn to dusk to nightfall, as well as the changes in atmosphere and feelings that followed. Chen Changsheng didn't understand these things. For him, if a meal took more than a quarter of an hour, then it meant it wasn't healthy. Just like the delicacies on the table in front of him, they all meant it wasn't healthy. Today's banquet at the Su estate was different from last time's regular family banquet. It was a formal banquet. Although he was the only guest, he was of the younger generation and was still very young. The doors of the Divine General of the East Estate, which only opened twice a year, were opened, and all kinds of dishes cooked with precious ingredients were continuously served. Then, without eating much, they were only glanced at for a few moments before they were taken away and replaced with a new round of dishes. As far as the eye could see, there were expensive utensils and porcelain dishes everywhere, making him naturally think of what Madame Su had said on his first day in the capital. There were maids everywhere. He didn't need to do anything. There would naturally be someone to serve him. Yet what was interesting was whether it was Madame Su, Nanny Hua, or that principal maid called Shuang. None of them appeared today. Perhaps it was because of what had happened between them and Chen Changsheng. Su Shiji was the only one accompanying him. Chen Changsheng didn't drink wine. Out of courtesy, he ate some dishes and was quickly full. Su Shiji put down his wine cup, waved his hand, indicating for everyone to leave and wait for him to speak. Chen Changsheng didn't like to speak in circles. Seeing this, he knew that Su Shiji had also mentally prepared himself, so he directly said, "You should already know my master's identity. The day I found out that Taoist Ji was Principal Shang, I was just as shocked as everyone else." Su Shiji didn't mention the long conversation he had with his father's portrait in the ancestral hall that day. He looked at Chen Changsheng and said indifferently, "Including Master Zhou Tong, there are many people who want to use this against you. But you don't have to worry. The laws of the Zhou dynasty have never said anything about punishment. Back then, when the Orthodox Academy's rebellion was exposed, you weren't even born yet. But you are still one of the Divine Empress's most trusted divine generals." Chen Changsheng asked, "Why do you still insist on this marriage? Everyone thinks that I'm unbearably vulgar. Who knows how many generations of good fortune I've accumulated to be able to give birth to such a daughter. Who knows how many people laugh at me in private." Su Shiji looked into Chen Changsheng's eyes and didn't conceal his cold emotions. He said, As for this marriage, it brought me endless humiliation. In the eyes of the world at the beginning, it was our Sioux estate that looked down on a poor youngster like you and wanted to break off the marriage, even suppressing and humiliating you. But afterwards, after knowing of your relationship with His Holiness the Pope, we shamelessly pestered you and insisted on marrying you. As a result, all the humiliation that was once inflicted on you now all returned to us. It can even be said that this is very shameless. The reception hall was very quiet. All of the servant girls had already moved far away. Su Shiji said, "Fortunately, no one thinks that my Rong isn't worthy of you, or else even she would be laughed at." Chun Chong Sheng thought to himself, "Since you know this matter is very ugly, why do you still persist? Last time when I came to break off the marriage, why didn't you just accept the marriage contract? But I don't care, or rather, I can endure this humiliation and ridicule." Su Shiji's eyes suddenly became sharp. He stared at Qin Chong Sheng and said, "Because I'm a father, I have to think for my daughter. I am loyal to the queen, but what's wrong with thinking for my own daughter?" These days, Qin Chong Sheng had thought many times about why the Sioux estate would insist on keeping this marriage contract. He had thought of many reasons, but he never thought it would be this one. Su Shiji just wanted the best for his daughter. Qin Chong Sheng should feel a little happy, the joy of being acknowledged, but he didn't, because he didn't believe that Su Shiji was this kind of person, this kind of father. "I know what you're thinking, what the people in the capital are thinking," Su Shiji said expressionlessly. Just like before the civil strife in Mount Li, everyone thought the same about the head of the Qiushan family. But reality has proven that you are all wrong. That's right. If I insist on this marriage, in the future, if His Holiness the Pope loses, the Divine Queen obviously won't allow me to continue living, but I am very sure that even if I die, the Queen will still love Ronger. And if His Holiness the Pope wins, because of your relationship, I presume that his venerable self will not have a bad opinion of Ronger." He looked at the side of Chun Chong Sheng's face and continued, "The confluence of North and South is already complete. The Mount Li sword sect might still be able to maintain its edge, and Qiushan Jun can use this opportunity to advance north. But what can South Stream Temple do? If Rong cannot marry you, the best outcome for her is to guard Holy Maiden Peak. But what if this marriage succeeds? The Pope and the Holy Maiden, this is the true confluence of North and South. Whether it's North or South, everyone is willing to see this scene. What is the general trend? This is the general trend. Regardless of whether I'm still alive, my Sioux clan will definitely leave its name in the annals of history. The true confluence of North and South, the general trend, everyone was willing to see this sort of scene, so this marriage had to continue. Chun Chong Sheng felt that these words were somewhat familiar, and then he remembered that ever since he came to the capital from Xining, he had often heard similar words. The maid called Shuang, had once said it, that Nanny had once said it, many people at the Ivy Festival had said it, and even Tang 36 had said it. It was just that at that time, the name associated with Su Yu Rong was not himself. He was not a person willing to hide his true thoughts. So he raised his head to Su Shiji and said, "Back then, all of you also said the same thing about Qiushan Jun. In my view, if you want to marry, Qiushan is naturally a better choice than you even now. The problem is that he is currently inferior to you." A better choice and inferior. These were two different concepts. Qin Chong Sheng thought about the news that came from Mount Li. When the sun shone on the main peak, Qiushan Jun calmly and casually stabbed himself with a sword, thus easily resolving a long-planned conspiracy. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, "I am inferior to him." Su Shiji did not understand his meaning and said, "The Pope is your martial uncle. Just based on this point, he will never be as good as you." Just like what Qiushan Jun said to his father on the main peak of Mount Li, young people and old people, as expected, could not be the same kind of people. Qin Chong Sheng did not know about those words, but he had the same feeling. He stood up and prepared to leave. At the same time, he took out the marriage contract and put on the table. His action was not very solemn, but it was not casual either. There was no arrogance, no inferiority. He just took it out and put on the table. He had already come to this divine general's estate 3 times. Each time, it was to cancel the marriage. Perhaps because of this reason, he was no longer as nervous and awkward as before. There was also no awkwardness on Su Shiji's face. When he received the letter from the Orthodox Academy saying that Chun Changsheng was coming to visit, he had already guessed at his intentions. Last time, I said that if you really wanted to cancel the marriage, then give the marriage contract to Ronger in front of her. In the Garden of Zhou, Chun Changsheng really did have this idea, but he never had the chance to meet Su Yurong. Then he was somewhat confused as to why both Su Shiji and Tang 36 had said similar words. It was as if they had determined that as long as he saw Su Yurong in person, he would never want to cancel the marriage. Even if Su Yurong was as beautiful as a goddess, so what? He even felt that other people looking at him like this was a form of contempt. I hear that Miss Su will return to the capital soon, so the marriage contract will be left in your estate. If Miss Su has any objections, please believe in the Orthodox Academy. He did not pay attention to Su Shiji's words and continued, please do not send the marriage contract back to the Orthodox Academy, or else it really might be lost. If that happens, it really won't look good. Su Shiji was furious at these words. He thought, you actually dare to threaten me, but his face did not show any emotion. Chun Changsheng was not threatening him, but speaking the truth. This marriage contract really had almost been lost in the Garden of Zhou. Back when he was fighting against Nang's wings at the bottom of the lake, in order to break through her wings of light, he had thrown out everything in his sheath, including the marriage contract. However, he no longer had any feelings towards this marriage, so he did not care much about the marriage contract. Only a few days ago, when he was preparing to go to the Su estate to break off the engagement, did he remember this matter. He looked at Su Shiji and originally wanted to say something, but after thinking it over, he gave up. Without saying anything more, he bid farewell and left. Su Shiji expressionlessly watched his back disappear into the night, then withdrew his gaze. He looked at the marriage contract, his expression slightly focused. He did not understand why the edges of the marriage contract were slightly wet. Walking in the garden of the divine general of the East estate, Chun Changsheng borrowed the lantern carried by the servant girl in front of him and looked at the straight trees and gray stones that he had a slight impression of. Chun Changsheng very naturally thought of his past encounters here. When he bid farewell, just now, he really did want to say something to Su Shiji, but he could not find the right words, nor did he know how to organize it. If it was Tang 36, he would probably directly ask Su Shiji, you are so shameless. Does your daughter know? But he could not say such words. He just suddenly felt some sympathy for Su Yurong. Su Shiji said that he insisted on this marriage for the sake of his daughter. But when he spoke, he kept talking about the general trend, the confluence of the North and South, and leaving his name in the annals of history. He did not hide his true thoughts at all. He thought, he is just a person who cares about fame, only thinking about bringing glory to his family and the Su clan for thousands of generations. In his eyes, what difference is there between his daughter and a memorial arch? Thinking about it this way, Su Yurong really was rather pitiful. While he was thinking like this without a clue, he arrived in front of a stone door. A girl stood in front of the stone door. It was very similar to the scene from a year and a half ago. Chapter 501. That girl was the maid of the Su mansion, Shuang'er. A year and a half had passed, and she seemed to have matured a lot. Her brows had also become a little more serene. Shuang'er looked at the youngster behind the lantern, no, the young man. She became more and more nervous. Her tightly clenched hands became a little warm. She wanted to say something. She felt that she should say something before her miss returned to the capital. Because she now realized, just like what her master and mistress said, this marriage might really be the best choice for her Mississippi. However, so many things happened back then. If it was her, she would definitely hold a grudge until now. Just when she bit her teeth and was about to speak, Chun Changsheng came to her, nodded, and continued to walk towards the stone door. There was no resentment, no hatred, no arrogance, no gnashing of teeth. It was very calm. It was as if he was just a passerby who nodded and greeted someone he met at a certain time and place. Shuang'er was stunned. It was during this time that Chun Chong Sheng walked past the stone door. Shuang turned around and raised her hand. She wanted to stop him, but she didn't. Looking at his back as he left, she felt a little lost. She didn't understand. Why did she feel that not much time had passed, but the youngster and the world seemed to have changed a lot? Leaving the Dongyu General's mansion, he walked along the official road and came to a stone bridge. It was still the same stone bridge. In the hot summer night, the river under the bridge was filled with people enjoying the cool. There were no leaves in the river. He stood on the bridge and looked back at the eaves of the Dongyu General's mansion. He was silent. He had the same feeling as Shuang. It had only been a year and a half since he came to the capital to break off the engagement. Why did it feel like a lifetime had passed? When he first left Xining and came to the capital, his main purpose was to participate in the great trial, get first place, enter the pavilion of ascending mist, and find the secret to change his fate. Breaking off the engagement was just a side goal. Although he still hadn't found a method to change his fate, without a doubt, his fate had already changed drastically. But why didn't he break off the engagement? He shook his head and walked towards the stone bridge. He decided to solve this problem as soon as possible. The one who started the trouble should be untied, and it was the same for the annulment of the engagement. Old Lady Taizai had already passed away, and her teacher had disappeared without a trace along with her senior apprentice brother, so they could only look for a third party in the marriage contract. He went to the Li Palace. Without the need to announce his arrival, the priest standing guard in front of the palace respectfully invited him in and specially accompanied him through the long divine path to the palace in the deepest part. At night, the Li Palace was very quiet, and the palace in which the Pope resided was even more so. The sky, separated by 4 black eaves, was dotted with stars. If one looked at it for a long time, it really did seem like a deep well. At some point, he had removed the string of stone beads from his wrist. The quiet hall resounded with the gurgling of water. He turned and walked in, bowing to the Pope, who seemed like an ordinary old man by the green leaf basin. "Martial uncle, why are you doing this?" In the past, Chen Chongsheng very rarely used the term martial uncle to address the Pope. It was not because he had some sort of obsession with mental cleanliness, but purely because he was not used to it. But after so many things had happened in the Orthodox Academy, and after hearing Su Shurji's rather naked words in the Divine General of the East Estate, he knew that no matter how he addressed the Pope, in the eyes of the common people, his relationship with the Pope was already inseparable. Thus, it was better to get used to it. He was a person who greatly valued his time. Since he had decided, he would do it. It was just like how this question had actually been lingering in his mind for a very long time. Now that he could meet the Pope, he would naturally very directly ask it. The title of martial uncle and the question itself caused the Pope to freeze for a moment, and then he began to laugh. Chen Chongsheng was asking about the struggle between the new and conservative factions of the Orthodoxy and the recent silence of the Li Palace. You are all young people, and even if the matters of young people are not trivial, if you have done something wrong or not good enough, there will always be room to make up for it or a reason. The Pope placed the wooden ladle back into the pool and took the linen cloth Chen Chongsheng handed over. After lightly wiping his hands, he said, "But us old people cannot do this. Young people can be impulsive, can be hot-blooded, but we must be calm, even cold. In the eyes of everyone, we are all very scheming and far-sighted. To put it nicely, we can't act impulsively. Behind everything we do, there is bound to be some scheme. So as long as we move, the matter will easily become big and there will be no room for it." These 2 sentences were actually rather fragmented, but Chen Chongsheng understood. This storm was originally the beginning of the offensive launched by the Tianhai clan and the Orthodoxy's new faction against the Pope, but it had been forcibly blocked by the Orthodox Academy at the Academy's gate. The Li Palace would naturally maintain its silence. The Pope walked back to his chair and indicated for him to sit, saying, "And this is an opportunity." These words were even simpler, even more vague, but Chen Chongsheng still understood. If the offensive launched by the Tianhai clan and the Orthodoxy's new faction could be controlled to a certain degree, then for him and the Orthodox Academy, this was an extremely precious opportunity. Just like how his spiritual sense had been cleansed in the ocean of sword intent to become even purer and tenser, his sword had also become even more stable and powerful in these battles. Only this way can you mature as quickly as possible, the Pope amiably said to him. Chen Chongqing only understood a part of this conclusion. In his discussion with Tang 36, he had been unable to confirm this point. Why had the Pope chosen this method to let him mature? It seemed too impatient. To use Tang 36's words, it was almost like pulling a sapling to help it grow. Seeing his expression, the Pope was somewhat surprised. I thought that you weren't very interested in these matters and would need some time to understand, or perhaps you would have come to find me even earlier. There are many things that, even if you aren't interested in, you still have to learn. Since you can't avoid it, this is what Tang said to me, Chen Chongshang said. Tang 36 had said to him, since you want to become the Pope, then you have to learn these seemingly uninteresting things. You have to have your own team, like the Orthodox Academy. The reason he had been able to understand the Pope's previous words was also because Tang 36 had made a similar analysis in advance. Now it seemed that Tang 36's calculations had been correct. You've made a very good friend. The Pope was somewhat sorrowful. When I first met his grandfather, we were about the same age as you. But later on, because of a few things, my thoughts differed from his grandfather's, so we naturally could not continue our friendship. He returned to Wenshui, and I entered the Li Palace. In the blink of an eye, so many years have passed. A few days ago, when he saw Mou and Tang 36 talking in the Orthodox Academy, Chen Chongqing had realized that the upper class of society existed, but he had never imagined that the Pope and the Tang Old Master had once been so close. Since he didn't come in the past few days, I thought that you wouldn't come in the near future. Why did you suddenly come tonight? The Pope asked. The Orthodox Academy had already endured through the most difficult phase. If it had not requested help from the Li Palace at that time, then there was even less reason for it to do so now. I went to the Divine General of the East's estate. Chen Chongsheng said, I want to end the engagement, but they've always been delaying, so I want to ask Marshal Uncle to directly end this engagement. The Pope noticed that the expression on his face was very serious. With a slightly surprised expression, he asked, Do you know what this engagement means? If it was in the past, Chen Chongsheng would naturally believe the story his master had told him. Su Yurong's grandfather sacrificed to the mountain for Emperor Xian and was ambushed by a demon great general. Even the imperial physicians could not cure him. Coincidentally, his master, Taoist Ji, passed by the area and miraculously brought the dying back to life. The Grand Minister, in his gratitude, made this engagement. But now he naturally understood that there was definitely a secret behind this engagement. Because his master was not only Taoist Ji, but also Principal Shang, the Divine Empress's strongest enemy. No matter what this engagement means, it has nothing to do with me. If a normal youth said these words to his elders, it would often be very childish and laughable, filled with a feeling of hot blood that would make others cover their noses. In reality, it was just selfishness and impudence. But when these words came out of Chen Chongqing's mouth, they did not have these problems. They seemed very calm and very persuasive. The difference was that the former often did not know what responsibility was, while he, after very serious consideration, had confirmed that this was not a responsibility that he should bear. Life and death were one's own business. Marriage was one's own business. Whether to have children was one's own business. How to raise children was also one's own business. Chen Chongsheng did not organize these matters. He just did it very naturally. Perhaps it was because he had always cultivated the cultivation of following his heart, and the above 4 points were the lowest requirements of following his heart. The Pope looked at him and asked again, Will you regret it in the future? The old man's eyes, which were as vast as the sea of stars, flashed a deep meaning. Chen Chongqing did not notice and said, I won't. The Pope quietly looked at him and said, Good. Before Chen Chongqing bid farewell, he asked, Can we not fight? This was obviously referring to the much-anticipated battle between him and Su Yurong. According to Tang 36 information, it was said that the 13 divisions of Radiant Green had already begun to prepare a letter of challenge. The writer was a great scholar of the court. Chen Changsheng had never wanted to fight with Su Yu Rong in the first place. Today, after going to the divine general of the East's estate, he felt even more sympathy for this girl that he had never met. Now that he had obtained the Pope's approval to cancel the engagement, he felt that there was even less reason to fight. Our sect cultivates the cultivation of following our heart. As long as you are willing, of course you can. Even if the other person wants, you can still avoid it. The Pope picked up the wooden ladle from the pool and continued to water the green leaf. He slowly said, "But you must be able to confirm that your choice is truly following your heart." Chen Changxing looked at the Pope's back. This time, he finally understood a little. He knew that these words had a deeper meaning. Chapter 502. The distance from Li Palace to the Imperial Palace wasn't far. It was just that with Chen Changsheng's current status, entering Li Palace was relatively easy, but entering the Imperial Palace was somewhat troublesome, especially in a situation where he didn't report in advance. In the end, Xuexing Chuan was alerted. "Principal Chen, why are you entering the Imperial Palace so late at night?" "I want to see Luo Luo." Xuexing Chuan's question was very casual. Chen Changsheng's response was even more casual, and the heavily guarded Imperial Palace opened its gates. Chen Changsheng followed a eunuch into the depths of the Imperial Palace. After a while, he came to his senses and didn't understand why Xuexing Chuan was so easy to talk to. He didn't know that it was because Xuexing Chuan had once waited for the Divine Empress to return from the secret door in the palace wall. Xuexing Chuan thought that the Divine Empress had specifically gone to see this youngster. Similarly, looking at Chen Changsheng's back, Xuexing Chuan also didn't understand why this youngster was so calm and natural in front of him. He was the Divine Empress's divine general. His younger brother Xue, his left arm was cut off by Chen Changsheng's sword in the wilderness. But after Chen Changsheng returned to the capital and met him several times, not only did Chen Changsheng not feel sorry, he didn't even feel wary. Luo Luo had a good time in the Imperial Palace. Although the palace walls isolated the bustling world, compared to the green leaf world, the sky and sun here were both real, just a little boring. So when she knew that Chen Changsheng had come to see her, she was very happy. The master and disciple talked for a long time in the quiet garden, talking about happy things. The topic only revolved around the great banyan tree and the lake, only talking about the rapid improvement of the food quality in Orthodox Academy. Xin Yuanpo's appetite was getting more and more exaggerated. Tang 36 dark circles were getting heavier. Su Moyu's expression was quite ugly after receiving his aunt's letter, and Jishio's expression was still the same, like a dead person. Chen Changsheng also talked about the dozen or so talented freshmen in Orthodox Academy, saying that if they were lucky, they should be able to pass the preliminary exam and maybe even get into the lower half of the top 3 in the grand examination. Luo Luo listened very happily, but compared to before, she spoke a lot less. Most of the time, she just opened her bright eyes and looked at Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng thought back to the Shuang he saw in the Su mansion and thought it was a natural change for a little girl after growing up, so he didn't pay much attention to it. Time passed quickly as they chatted, and neither of them noticed that it was already late at night. That was until Guardian Li, who was hiding in the bushes, felt that something was wrong and coughed twice. Only then did Chen Changsheng remember the main reason why he came to see Luo Luo tonight. He held her hand and walked to the wall. Using his body to block off all possible prying eyes, he took out something and stuffed it into her hand. Luo Luo was shocked. She looked at the stone bead in her palm. She didn't understand why Mr. Bai would give her this. "I'm not sure if telling you the truth is good or bad for your cultivation, so I won't say it for now. But in short, this is a good thing." Chen Changsheng looked at her and said, "You must not lose it. When you have nothing to do, hold it in your hands and feel it. It's best not to let others see it." Luo Luo earnestly said, I definitely won't lose the gift that teacher gave me." When Jin Yu Lu saw Chen Changsheng off, he looked at him, wanting to say something but hesitating. Chen Changsheng didn't understand and asked, "Uncle Jin, what's wrong?" Jin Yu Lu sighed in his heart. In the end, he didn't say it out loud. He asked, "What were you talking about with Her Highness in the corner?" Chen Changsheng said, "Nothing much. I gave her a small toy." Jin Yulu used to be an official in the White Emperor City. He farmed for a living, but seeing his silk robe full of copper coins, he knew his personality. He asked with interest, "Is it very valuable? Does it belong to the Tang family?" In his view, Chun Changsheng was extremely poor. In the past, he depended on Princess Luo Luo and Tang 36 to help him. How could he have anything good? It should be a gift from the Tang family. Chun Changsheng shook his head and said, "I picked it up before. It's not worth much." Hearing that it was picked up and not worth much, Jin Yulu instantly lost interest. Thinking about what was going to happen next, he couldn't help but get even more annoyed. Her Highness gave you so many good things. Have you never thought about giving her something in return? A person like Chun Changsheng couldn't understand the meaning behind these words. He said honestly, "This is the best thing I have." By the time he returned to the Orthodox Academy, it was already very late at night. In the past, Chun Changsheng would have long since fallen asleep, but he didn't today. He first went to the 100-her garden, then to the library, and then to his room. Standing in front of the window and looking at the stars and the lake, he thought of the night sky cut apart by the black eaves of the Li Palace. Going to the pavilion of ascending mist was arranged by his master. The box that Wang Ji hid in the wall was also told to him by his master. But the switch on the box had never been touched, which meant that no one had opened the box. This also meant that his master probably didn't know the contents of Wang Ji's notebook. He also didn't know that Wang Ji had mentioned his name in it, Taoist Ji. From Wang Ji's notebook, it could be seen that Taoist Ji was already very famous in the era of Emperor Taizong. He could freely enter the imperial palace and the mansions of the nobles and ministers. Then when did he take over the position of principal of the Orthodox Academy? And how did he freely switch between these two identities? Chun Changsheng's gaze rested on the book by his hand. It was a record of the major events of the Orthodox Academy. Previously, he had found in this book the date his master took over the position of principal of the Orthodox Academy and a few major events that had occurred before and after, but he still couldn't understand how his master had been able to conceal it from all living beings in the world. Crucially, how had he been able to conceal it from a pope? It must be known that they were fellow disciples of the same sect, and it was rumored that in the coup of the Orthodox Academy, his master had died at the hands of the pope. Was there some secret behind all this? There were many parts of the entire matter that he couldn't understand. For instance, the pope's change had been too sudden, so sudden that even Taoist Siyuan and Linghai Jiju, whom he had single-handedly raised, had broken off relations with him. Why? He had once asked the pope, and the answer he had obtained was an extremely powerful reason, but it had still completely dispelled the doubts in his mind. Could the fate of all living beings in the world really affect the choice of a saint? Even after thinking for a very long time, he still could not understand. Moreover, this matter involved his master and senior, so he had no way of communicating with Tang 36 and Luo Luo. He somewhat helplessly shook his head and stuffed the book into the deepest part of the bookshelf. He walked back to the side of the window and borrowed the starry sky to calm his mind. He closed his eyes and began to meditate. With a slight movement of his spiritual sense, it landed on the black stone pearl. The cold wind brushed against his face, and he immediately became clear-headed. He had appeared in the garden of Zhou, and he was still standing at the very top of the mausoleum. Chapter 503. He realized that compared to yesterday, today's wind seemed to have a different smell. It was a little more moist, and it also had a faint smell of mud, but this was not a bad thing. How could a canal be so clear? It was because there was a source of flowing water. The canal beneath the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books was as clear as nothing. The Garden of Zhou had opened once more, and it would probably develop in a good direction. The monster horde was a little closer to the Mausoleum of Zhou. It still seemed like a dense mass, but from a distance, one could sense some changes. Arriving on the plains and seeing the tens of thousands of monsters kneeling in front of him, Chun Changsheng was somewhat astonished. Yesterday, he had only brought a few herbs with him, but he had not expected that the mountain-toppling fiend and the monster bull's injuries would be much better. The other monsters also seemed to be much more spirited. Today, the earth monkey was not hiding in the mountain-toppling fiend's horns, but in the monster horde. It looked at him from a distance, its eyes rolling around. It was hard to tell what it was thinking, but there was no viciousness to it. Chun Changsheng took out some herbs and placed them on the ground in front of him. Seeing this, the monster bull slowly nodded its head to express its gratitude, and then it straightened its tail like a flagpole. The mountain-toppling fiend stood up and howled at the vast plains behind it. The horde of demonic beasts surged like a tide, and then began to line up on their own, appearing to be extremely well-behaved and well-behaved. Even those old enemies that would normally fight to the death when they saw each other, at this moment, even though they were squeezed together, they did not dare to make any movements. Qin Changsheng was somewhat surprised. After staring blankly for a moment, he continued. In a short while, a small mountain of herbs had piled up in front of him. Seeing this small mountain of herbs, even though the monster bull and mountain-toppling fiend had seen many things with Zhou Dufu, their eyes still couldn't help but become somewhat lifeless. The earth monkey was even worse off. It roughly shoved aside the flood serpent at its side, its forelegs incessantly clawing at the ground. Like a bolt of lightning, it shot to the very front of the monster horde, and then fell with a thump at Chun Changsheng's feet. It fell with great care. Its forelegs were raised high while its crippled lower body lightly slapped the ground, stirring up a small cloud of dust. It seemed especially obedient. Last time, it had also kissed the ground at Chun Changsheng's feet, but that had been an act far inferior to the sincerity of this moment. This was because it had confirmed that Chun Changsheng was truly willing to help these monsters. More importantly, he actually had the ability to help these monsters. You guys divide it among yourselves. We'll follow yesterday's rules. Chun Changsheng didn't know how to deal with these monsters. After thinking for a while, he said this and then walked towards the edge of the grassland. The herd of beasts retreated behind him like a tide, sending him off. Yesterday, he had already carefully searched through the garden of Zhou. Today, he did not repeat this process. Instead, he went directly to the lake and mountain on the other side of the cold pool. In the depths of the lake, he found the night pearl that Luo had gifted him, as well as those 3,000 Taoist scriptures that he had brought from Xining Village's old temple to the capital. Finally, he dug out from the mud the chests that held the banknotes and treasures. As for the food he brought for the black dragon to eat along the way, it had long been devoured by the fish or other creatures in the lake. Returning to the shore with these things, he looked at the sky and placed the soaked books on a rock to dry. He knew that this was a very troublesome task that required a lot of time and patience, so he was not in a hurry. The soaked pages of the books were very difficult to open, let alone so many books. He constantly walked between the rocks on the shore, as if he was carrying out a very grand ceremony. The shore was about a li long and was littered with books. The water that dripped from the books gradually evaporated under the sunlight. Chun Changsheng took advantage of the time he was resting to pick out the banknotes and jewels from the chests and wipe them clean with a handkerchief. Suddenly, he saw a small object. It was a dragonfly made of bamboo. It had always been very old, and because it had been soaked in the water for too long, it had long since turned white. There were even some places that were on the verge of rotting. This was evidence of his correspondence with a certain person many years ago when he was still in Xining Village. It was also a memory of his childhood. Looking at the bamboo dragonfly, Chun Changsheng fell silent for a while. Those books had not rotted, but it could not hold on. As expected, compared to the quality, time was more important. There was nothing that could stand the test of time. That engagement had already been annulled. From now on, he had nothing to do with her. When he thought of this, his mood became very relaxed, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But for some reason, he felt like he had lost something, and his heart felt somewhat empty. The midsummer gradually faded, and the autumn air gradually deepened. Winter was also not far away. The area outside the gate of the Tradition Academy became much quieter. Very few battles occurred. The citizens of the capital that came to see the excitement gradually lost their interest. The pergola across the street was also finally torn down during the Autumn Star Festival. It was unknown whether it was because the weather had turned cold, the sun was no longer blazing, or some other reason. The courtyard of the Orthodox Academy, on the other hand, became much livelier. Every morning, at dawn, one could hear the clear sound of books being read. When it was time to eat, one could hear the sound of students banging on their rice bowls. Of course, there were even more cheers and laughter. The 100 Herb Garden, which was separated from the Tradition Academy by a wall, actually changed the most. But because very few people went in to see, it was not discovered. The countless fruit trees and herbs in the herb garden had all become bare. Until one day, a eunuch from the palace was ordered to come and find a herb. That herb was extremely precious. It was said that it had a miraculous effect on growing flesh. If the medicine was used appropriately and refined into a pill, it could even grow white bones. The reason why the palace was in such a hurry to find this herb was because the Princess of Ping had a pimple on her face. She was so angry that she could not even eat, especially when she heard that Su Yurong would soon return to the capital. The eunuch could not find this herb. He looked at the obviously much more desolate 100 Herb Garden, and his face paled to the extreme. He thought to himself, isn't this year's autumn wind a little too fierce? The herbs and spirit fruits of the 100 Herb Garden had obviously been taken by Chen Changsheng. In these days, he lived the same peaceful and serious life as he had for the past 16 years. He read, cultivated, practiced the sword, and then passed his 16th birthday. What was slightly different from the past years was that on the third day after his birthday, he did not think of the other person who celebrated his birthday on that day. He also very seriously studied the string of stone pearls, wanting to comprehend something from the heavenly tome monoliths. But for the time being, he did not find anything. His cultivation level became more and more stable, getting closer and closer to the peak of ethereal opening, but the problem with his body did not improve. That shadow was still quietly watching him. Under his research and guidance, the problem with Luo's meridians was officially broken through. Cultivating the cultivation method of humans was no longer too difficult. Most importantly, after this problem was solved, she only needed to activate her bloodline once more. This meant that she had a high chance of breaking through the many years of the Yao race's royal family and learning the White Emperor's tyrannical cultivation method as a woman. For the Yao race, this was an extremely important matter. It was said that after the news reached the Yao race, the tribes along the 800 li of the Red River celebrated for 3 days and 3 nights. Moreover, it was said that White Emperor City had sent out a diplomatic mission, bringing a large number of gifts to Orthodox Academy and Chen Changsheng that normal people could not imagine. Being able to solve Luo's problem naturally meant being able to solve Xian Yuan Po's problem. After the injury to his right arm was completely healed, the Bear Tribe youth began to cultivate Heavenly Thunderbringer. His strength increased by leaps and bounds. His pair of iron fists attracted lightning and could be said to be incomparably tyrannical. Jin Yulu specially came to Orthodox Academy to take a look and was very pleased. He decided on the spot that after returning to White Emperor City, he would ask for a generous reward for the Bear Tribe. Xian Yuan was moved to tears. He no longer had to feel ashamed that he could eat blue lobster every day in the human race's capital, while his fellow villagers could only hunt in the mountains. Qin Changsheng was also very happy for him, not noticing that Jin Yulu's words contained some other information. Zhixio's injuries were also gradually improving. Unlike other patients who rested in bed and relied on time to heal their wounds, Zhixio seemed to be lying motionless on the bed. But in reality, he was constantly using his true qi to attack his injured, blocked, and broken meridians. That kind of pain was something that only he could experience. The only thing Chen Changsheng could do was use his needles to help him slightly alleviate the pain. Just like he had once said, pain was the most direct and powerful method to stimulate one's vitality. On a certain night in late autumn, he didn't need anyone's help to get out of bed. Then, he used the entire night to walk from upstairs to the lakeside. Afterwards, he faced the night sky full of stars and let out a cold wolf howl. Everyone in Orthodox Academy was startled awake. Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 rushed to the lakeside. Looking at the emaciated Zhixio, They felt an indescribable emotion and couldn't say anything. Zhixio's injuries were completely healed, and he even took advantage of the situation to open up the 17 chi openings in the body of a demon. As long as he was given enough time to feel and stabilize, his strength would definitely rise to a terrifying level. The entire capital heard this wolf howl. The alley of the Northern Military Department was as quiet as a deathly place. Zhou Tong, who seemed to have just recovered from a serious illness, raised his head and glanced in the direction of Orthodox Academy. His expression was indifferent, and he didn't care at all. Zhou Tong had recently been very busy. He was busy dealing with the matters of the imperial court, busy communicating with certain people in the south, and preparing to welcome the great upheaval next year. Yes, many people had already sensed that an undercurrent was slowly surging, causing the capital to become much quieter. But this was not a bad thing. On the contrary, it brought with it a certain kind of hope. The confluence of North and South really did seem to be on the verge of being placed on the agenda. No one understood why. Su Li was still at Mount Li. Mount Li was still in the south. Why was it that so many people were certain that neither Su Li nor Mount Li would stop this matter? The war with the demons was the most important matter for humanity and the demi-human race. There was nothing else that could compare to it. The confluence of North and South was unquestionably the most important component of this grand undertaking. Whether it was the capital, the South, or White Emperor City, they all had to make corresponding preparations for this matter. The capital and the South needed to consider the distribution of power between them. White Emperor City needed to consider a relatively simple matter. The Saint couple only needed to ensure that their bloodline could continue to maintain their rule over the demi-human domain and ensure the stability of the two shores of the Red River. This was the greatest contribution they could make to the demi-human alliance. Thus, when White Emperor City's diplomatic mission arrived in the capital, bringing countless gifts and rewards to the Orthodox Academy in Xinjiang, it also had an even more important mission, to bring back Princess Luoluo. Chapter 504. Most of the leaves on the great banyan tree had fallen off. Standing on the tree, Chen Changsheng could see the Li Palace and the mausoleum of books clearly, as if they were right in front of him. I really didn't expect this. Chen Changsheng looked at Luoluo beside him. After a long silence, he said again, I really didn't expect this. When I first came to the capital, it was my mother's idea. She wanted to see if the Pope or the Divine Queen could help me solve the problem of my meridians. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to practice the martial arts of the White Emperor's family and inherit the throne. I might even have to marry someone I don't want to marry. But my mother definitely didn't expect that the Pope and the Divine Queen couldn't solve this problem, but you did. Luoluo raised her head and looked at his face with admiration. Master, you are really amazing. I just like to think about the problem of meridians since I was young. Chen Changsheng remembered that he already explained this problem last year, so he was silent. He really didn't expect Luoluo to leave. Although her departure was expected, she came to the capital to study or to cure her illness. Now that she learned how to practice the martial arts of humans, saw the possibility of inheriting the White Emperor's throne, and cured her illness, she naturally had to return to the White Emperor City. Because she was the princess of the Red River, there were billions of people waiting for her to take care of. But all of this happened too suddenly. There was no warning. When they met in the Royal Palace and the Li Palace, she never mentioned it. Okay, these were all excuses. Even if it was not sudden, he would still be reluctant, because he really was reluctant. The dusk was thick. The lake and trees of the Tradition Academy seemed to be burning. Luoluo walked out of the Tradition Academy and suddenly stopped. Then she turned around and lightly leaned into his arms. Chen Changsheng knew how she felt, because he also felt the same. He reached out his hand and rubbed her head. In the past 2 years, they often sat side by side or held hands, or she would rest her head on his chest. Because they were familiar with each other, he did not think much of it. In his eyes, she was a little girl like a younger sister or daughter. Master, I have been lying to you about something. Luoluo raised her head and looked at him. She blinked her eyes and said, Actually, I am not 12 years old. I'm the same age as you. Chen Changsheng was stunned. He didn't know what to say. As for his hands, he didn't know where to put them. Ew. How could you lie to me? Mister, you're the one who's stupid. You can't see it, so you're blaming me. Luo stared at him with her eyes wide open. Chen Changsheng was speechless. The Orthodox Academy resounded with laughter like silver bells. Ha ha! Luo left, returning to White Emperor City to meet the challenges she had to face. Her laughter echoed for many years under the great banyan tree of the Orthodox Academy and over the surface of the lake. Until a long time later, when the students of the Tradition Academy mentioned the legendary Yao Princess, the vice principal whom they had never met, they would sigh endlessly. At the same time, Tang 36 would feel endless resentment. What did he say when he was recruiting new students? Luo left, but more and more people entered and left the Orthodox Academy. Priests from the Department of Traditional Education came to teach. Priest Xin would come here when he had nothing to do. Mao Qiu would occasionally go to the tea house outside of the Orthodox Academy to sit for a while. The person who visited Orthodox Academy the most was Prince Chen Lu. Time can change many things, including one's view of people, because time is the only standard for testing the truth and the human heart. Through their interactions, whether it was Chen Changsheng or Xian Yuan Pa, or even the cold and detached Xiao, they all felt that this young prince truly wanted to protect Orthodox Academy, and the two became more and more familiar with each other. But time couldn't change everything. For example, the stones in the toilet were always smelly and hard. Tang 36 still didn't like Prince Chen Lu. He didn't even bother to show his respect. Every time Prince Chen Lu came to the Tradition Academy as a guest, Tang 36 would mock him and then leave. Today was the same. No matter how good Prince Chen Lu's manners were, he couldn't help but show an embarrassed expression. Chen Changsheng felt a little embarrassed. He apologized for Tang 36 and went to find him. He wanted to ask him why he was doing this. However, when he found Tang 36 in the depths of the forest of the Orthodox Academy, he forgot to ask him about this matter. This was because this matter was ultimately not a very important matter, and what Tang 36 was doing was extremely strange. Tang 36 didn't hit the tree like Xian Yuanpa. He also didn't bury himself under the leaves to lie for 7 days and 7 nights like Zhixiu. He was squatting under the tree and shoving something into the hole. Chen Changsheng saw clearly that the thing he shoved into the hole was a sword. And it wasn't a normal sword. It was a famous sword that Tang 36 asked him for last night. "What are you doing?" he asked in surprise. Tang 36 said without turning his head, "I told you before. I'm going to hide all your swords. I'll let people find them later." Chen Changsheng couldn't believe it and asked, "Recently, you've been asking me for a sword every 2 days, and I haven't seen you return it. Are you hiding them all?" Tang 36 rubbed the edge of the tree hole and made a very rough disguise. After looking at it for a while, he felt satisfied. He stood up and said to him, "What else? Do you think I'm going to sell your broken swords to buy alcohol?" Chen Changsheng was speechless and said, "Those are my swords. Hurry up and give them back. I only asked for 100 or so swords from you. Why are you so nervous? I didn't know you were going to hide these swords. I thought you were going to use the sword spirit to learn sword arts. So I picked the best swords for you. So what? Look at how stingy you are. It's just a few broken swords. How much money have I given you for the past 2 years? This isn't about money. Even if you want them, you have to tell me first. If I knew you were going to waste them like this, why would I give them to you? Then it's settled. I know you won't give them to me if you know. Why would I tell you the reason first? Do you think I'm Xin Yuanpa? Stupid. I don't care. Just hurry up and find those swords." "I don't care either. Hiding swords is very tiring. I have to find them again. It's very troublesome. Plus, the toilet stinks. You hid my sword in the toilet. Pretend you didn't hear me. I'm too lazy to look for them. Then I'll go myself. Hurry up and tell me where you hid those swords." "Since it's hidden, of course I can't tell you where. You have to find them yourself. If you can find them, then you're amazing. Please don't use the word huh." Luo dropped a big radish. "You don't talk about this anymore. You're so stupid. You're not even worth a radish. I'm asking you about the swords. Hide and seek is very fun. Huh. Did I do something wrong? My suggestion is, even if you become the Pope in the future, don't go to White Emperor City. Why? I'm worried that the White Emperor will eat you alive. Actually, although you're a bit stupid, they say stupid people have stupid luck. Otherwise, if you really married Luo, it would be the same as marrying a tigress. How will you live in the future? I know that the last part of this conversation is rather long-winded and a bit of chatterbox, but after all this time, I really can't bear to delete it because I really like it, just like Luo. I also like it like everyone else, so I naturally won't just disappear like this. In the future, we'll often meet. We're not those pitiful students of the Orthodox Academy. Chapter 505. Note: Huang Yin's Everything Read is recommended to listen to when reading this chapter. Time passed in this manner between farewells and quarreling. Although there was still no sign that Su Li and the Southerners he represented would abandon the beliefs they had upheld for countless years, everyone could see through countless details that the confluence of the North and South was inevitable. Right at this moment, a relatively insignificant matter actually overshadowed this major matter. The reason this matter was a minor matter was because it was a marriage. According to the news from the Li Palace, in an extremely private conversation, the Pope had admitted that he had already annulled the engagement between Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. This news was secretly spread throughout the capital and the continent, but there was no evidence. The Divine General of the East Estate and the Orthodox Academy maintained their silence, but gradually, people began to believe it. At the Ivy Festival, the Southern Diplomatic Mission had proposed marriage on behalf of Qiu Shanjun. At the time, the nameless Chen Changsheng had pushed open the door and entered. He took out a marriage contract, and then a white crane flew over from Holy Maiden Peak. From then until now, this marriage had always been the focus of the entire continent's discussion. This was because this marriage contract concerned the three most outstanding youths with the greatest prospects in the human world, as well as many other things. The Orthodoxy, Holy Maiden Peak, the Divine Empress, the Qiushan clan, and the Mountly Sword sect. It could be said that the strongest powers of the continent were all linked together because of this marriage contract. Was it really going to end like this? If this matter was true, if Chen Changsheng had taken the initiative to ask the Pope to annul the engagement, then what would the Divine General of the East Estate, which had been ridiculed for so long, do? What sort of mood would that heavenly phoenix true daughter, who was loved or worshipped by everyone, feel when faced with such a difficult situation? Many people were furious at Chen Changsheng because of this rumor, especially those worshippers of Su Yurong. But in the end, it was only a rumor. No one could ask the Pope, so there was naturally no reason to vent their anger on the Orthodox Academy. Even if people wanted to ask Chen Changsheng if this matter was true, they would find it very difficult to find Chen Changsheng. As a result, all their emotions could only gradually simmer and ferment. Perhaps it was anger, perhaps it was ridicule, or perhaps they just wanted to watch the spectacle. Because of these various emotions, the entire continent increasingly anticipated the day that Su Yurong would return to the capital. They anticipated the battle that seemed destined to happen. Chen Changsheng truly was very difficult to meet. In the past few days, he had been in seclusion, especially after the rumor that his engagement had been annulled by the Pope began to circulate. Because of this matter, he felt a bit apologetic towards Su Yurong. Because she was a young girl, he decided to keep silent about this matter. After Su Yurong returned to the capital, he would think of a way to tell her the truth about this matter. He would let her ask the whole world to cancel the engagement, and then he would accept it. In this way, perhaps she wouldn't have to bear the strange gazes, even if those gazes were filled with pity. As for the ridicule and sympathy that would inevitably be given to one of the parties to the engagement, he would do it because he was a man. For some reason, he had never met Su Yurong before, but he was certain that she was not a person who was willing to accept sympathy from others. So when Tang 36 heard the rumor and asked him, he shook his head and said nothing. The youth who had just entered the capital did not understand matters such as engagements or relationships. Only after entering the Garden of Zhou did he realize that this was actually the case. He liked a girl, but that girl died. He was liked by a girl, that girl left. He hoped that Su Yurong would be happier than him. In this period of time, He did his utmost to avoid meeting with other people, and the number of times he met with the black dragon increased. He would often go to the bottom of the well at New North Bridge and deliver all sorts of food to the black dragon, especially the large pot of rice from the Orthodox Academy's cafeteria that she specifically requested to eat. Every time the black dragon pretended to be gentle and quiet as she slowly ate, he would crouch under the stone wall and study the array that imprisoned the black dragon in that chain, but he never made any progress. On a certain night, as autumn passed and winter came, it was already 2:45, but Chen Changsheng still had not gone to sleep. He stood in front of the window, gazing at the great banyan tree whose leaves had already fallen in the frozen surface of the lake. He was thinking about a few things, and then he heard the sound of singing coming from the distant wall. Recently, he could often hear some singing at night. He shook his head. The Orthodox Academy had now become a famous attraction of the capital. Because the duel had temporarily come to an end, the number of people who came to see the excitement had greatly decreased, but the number of tourists from other counties had increased instead of decreasing. In addition, the number of students, teachers, and workers in the Orthodox Academy added up to several hundred people. With people, there would naturally be business opportunities. Merchants would never miss any opportunity. The entire street across from Hunter Blossom Lane was either sold or rented or transformed into various places. There were inns and restaurants, gradually becoming more and more lively. Every night, the business of the inns and restaurants would become very good. Some of them were famous guests, but of course, even more were students of the Orthodox Academy. No matter how strict the Academy's rules were, no matter how strict the entrance was, the students could always find various ways to overcome the gatekeepers and the walls, and then enter the inns and restaurants to do the things that young people like to do. For example, eating, drinking, listening to music, and talking about life. The teachers of the Orthodox Academy obviously wanted to control it, but they couldn't control the students. They also wanted to drive away the restaurants that brought a lot of excitement, but it was very difficult. No matter if it was the Orthodoxy Cavalry, the City Gate Department, or the Imperial Guards, none of them could do anything. Tang 36, who truly had the ability to take care of all the inns and restaurants across Hunter Blossom Lane, couldn't do anything because 2 of the inns and restaurants were owned by him. Late at night, the bustling streets were still there. The singing on the other side of the wall became louder and clearer, drifting into the Orthodox Academy. Chen Changsheng was just about to find the fur that Mou left here one night and stuff it into his ears to help him sleep, but he was suddenly attracted by the lyrics of the song. The singer should be a new student of the Orthodox Academy. His voice was very hoarse, probably still in the stage of puberty, but his voice was very loud. The lyrics of this song were very simple, not elegant, even a little vulgar, but it was filled with a unique taste of youth. When combined with the voice of the boy, it seemed especially lively. Youth is all red. You are the master. If you want rain, you get rain. If you want wind, you get wind. If you want carp leaping over the dragon gate is different. Chen Changsheng stood in front of the window, quietly listening to this song and thinking of the people and events he had encountered in the last 2 years in the capital. He found it somewhat difficult to calm down. Countless emotions surged forth like a tide. Yes, they surged forth like a tide. In the past, he had always believed that this sort of description was an exaggeration from a romance story. Only now did he know that it was all true. He subconsciously rubbed the stone bracelet on his wrist and returned to the Garden of Zhou. In the past few days, he would often come to the Garden of Zhou and sit in the plains in a daze. Perhaps it was because he felt that interacting with those monsters was much simpler than interacting with humans. Those monsters were very obedient. Under his arrangements, they dredged the waterways and restored the plains and lakes. Coupled with the self-repair from the reopening, the Garden of Zhou had already recovered some of its former appearance. The reason why he, who cherished his time so much, was willing to spend so much time and energy in the Garden of Zhou was because he wanted to leave behind a few mementos. He stood at the end of the divine path of the mausoleum of Zhou, watching as the mountain-toppling fiend commanded the tens of thousands of monsters to rebuild the white grass path. The monsters were a dense mass. He felt that the scene was rather familiar, and then he remembered. Back then, He had been here with her, watching as the monsters of the plains surged forth like a tide. Thus, sorrow and longing surged forth like a tide. On the official road to the south of the capital, a convoy of several dozen carriages was majestically advancing. Several hundred cavalry from the south rode, their mixed-blood flood horses, vigilantly watching their surroundings and protecting the convoy. Several dozen disciples of South Stream Temple and the representatives of the various factions of the South sat in their respective carriages. The carriage in the very center clearly had the highest status, because in front of it were 8 snow-white Pegasi. This carriage was very large, or perhaps it should be more accurate to call it an imperial carriage. Su Yurong sat in the imperial carriage, her black hair scattered over her shoulders, contrasting against her skin that was like white jade. The common people like to describe beautiful women as picturesque, but how could her beauty be painted with brush and ink? Her eyelashes were very long, her lips very red, her facial features impeccable. Her beauty was perfect, but it did not give off any pressure, because her beauty was very tranquil. Just like the Team Mountain after the rain, the lake before the rain, the fog of Holy Maiden Peak, the smoke from the chimneys of a small village. She had returned to the capital this time to bring an incomparably important piece of news to the world. In the last few days, both the Great Zhou and the South were preparing for the confluence of the North and South, and the news she brought was the prerequisite, the permission for all this. And then she had to go on an appointment, an arranged battle. The entire continent, even the demon dukes in Xiulao City, were waiting to see this battle. In the view of many people, compared to Demon Princess Snake, that person was her true destined foe, because he had once been her fiancé, but now, in the view of many people, he was a cold man who had annulled the engagement and humiliated her. The convoy suddenly stopped. With a few soft noises, a woman raised the curtain and sat in the carriage. She looked at Su Yurong with a complex expression and said, "Martial nephew, we're about to reach the capital." This woman was an elder of South Stream Temple's outer sect, Qingba. She had already reached the middle level of star condensation. After saying this, Qingba suddenly thought of something. A nervous expression appeared on her face as she awkwardly said, "Qingba misspoke. Temple Master, please forgive me. Martial Aunt does not need to be so polite." Su Yurong calmly said to her, then stood up and walked out of the carriage. With her movements, her black hair and her white robe gently swayed. The front edge of her black hair was extremely neat, as if it had been cut by the sharpest sword. As it swayed, her eyes became calmer, more powerful. Her white robe was tied with a belt studded with stars. She did not carry a sword, as she had come to the capital precisely to take a sword. The Tong Bao was placed in a corner of the carriage, not in her hands, as she did not want to be seen by a certain person in the capital for the time being. There was also an umbrella in the corner. Arriving on the official road, she gazed at the city faintly discernible on the distant horizon and slowly held her hands behind her back. The capital had no walls, nor did it have a true city gate. As a result, when she was young, she had never understood why there was a city gate guard. With her appearance, the surrounding cavalry of the South immediately dismounted and kneeled on the ground. The disciples of South Stream Temple and the envoys also began to kneel. They kneeled because they had to pay their respects. Paying respects to the Holy Maiden. Su Yurong was still looking at the capital. It had been many years since she had returned, but she was still no stranger to the capital, because her home was here. Mou, the state of Ping, many people she had known when she was young were here. The Empress was here, and that fellow was also here. 2 lines suddenly appeared in the blue sky, one white and one gray, and they shot straight into the capital. Seeing this sight, she returned to her senses and realized that the crowd was paying their respects to her. It had already been a few days since that incident, but she was still rather unused to it. She did not know what words she should use to reply to these pious and respectful greetings. Suddenly, she recalled the words that she had often said on that fellow's back in the plains of the Garden of Zhou. At that time, she would not forget to say these words to that fellow every day, because they represented her most sincere wishes. Perhaps this was the most suitable reply. Thus, she looked at the crowd and said, "May the sacred light be with all of you." Book 3, The Beginning of the Storm Ends. Chapter 506, The Wind, the Rain, and the Reading of Books. For the time being, today, the Orthodox Academy could only listen to the sound of books. The snowflakes that had just drifted down from the sky were too soft. It took a while for the students in the classroom to see them, eliciting a burst of exclamations of delight. The teachers from the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education harshly berated them, suppressing the faint uproar. However, in the next moment, the whistling of the wind came from outside the window, and no classroom could maintain its calm. The young students all rushed to the windows. The wind swept up the thin snow that had just accumulated on the grass. A white crane slowly descended from the sky, dancing in the snow, a sight incomparably beautiful. So beautiful! The girls, seeing this sight, excitedly yelled. With the rise of the demi-human race, the monsters that had once wreaked havoc on the continent had long ago been forced to hide in the great swamps and barren mountains. Correspondingly, divine beasts and immortal birds had also become extremely rare. Normally, only those sects deep in the mountains could see them. The majority of the new students of the Orthodox Academy came from the provinces and counties. Compared to the experienced and knowledgeable people of the capital, they had rarely seen these legendary immortal birds. However, there were also people who had lived in the capital for a very long time. Chu Wenbin, who had transferred from the Heavenly Tao Academy, looked at the white crane and thought of something. In shock, he said, Isn't this the white crane of the Sioux estate?" At these words, his surroundings instantly fell silent. Soon after, all the classrooms fell silent. The students gazed at the white crane, no longer daring to make too much noise. This white crane was no ordinary white crane. Its appearance represented a name. To the students, that name was so holy and beautiful that it could not be profaned. At the same time, the students also knew what the white crane's return meant to the Orthodox Academy, to their principal. Just as expected, it didn't take long before a figure appeared before the students. Chun Changsheng walked onto the lawn by the lake and stood in front of the white crane. The white crane looked at him and nodded, then turned its head to the nearby library and those students by the windows. It seemed rather perplexed, as if it did not understand how in just 1 year, such a great change had occurred here. Looking at the white crane, he fell silent for a while, then asked, "She returned?" The two lines headed straight for the capital, one white and one gray. The white was the white crane, while the gray was the golden-winged great pung that Su Yorong had brought out of the Garden of Zhou. The reason why it was gray was because this rock hadn't matured yet. Its feathers hadn't become bright, and it didn't have the color of flowing gold. It looked gray and a little small. Just like Qin Changsheng's first reaction, it now looked like a pheasant. When it entered the capital, the white crane gave a clear cry. The red falcons that were preparing to take off to intercept it naturally let it pass. However, this young pung did not follow the white crane to the Orthodox Academy. On the contrary, it seemed to have developed an interest in these same species of the imperial city. It made a sharp turn in the air, flapped its wings, and landed on the palace wall. It was said that a phoenix in distress was not as good as a pheasant. This young rock looked like a pheasant, but in the end, a phoenix was a phoenix, and a golden rock was a golden rock. It was impossible for it to become a pheasant. It folded its wings, raised its head, and walked toward the flock of red falcons in front of the palace wall. It looked left and right, its eyes indifferent, seeming extremely arrogant and unruly. The red falcons were the strongest attacking birds that the great Zhou army had tamed. Their speed was unimaginably fast, and they were naturally proud and valiant. No matter how powerful an enemy they encountered, they would not cower. It was said that in the war to exterminate the demons 1,000 years ago, the demon commander of that generation raised a monster in the sky. In the end, it was pecked to death by several dozen red falcons in the blue sky at the cost of its life. Yet now, when they saw this rather small fellow that looked like a pheasant on the palace wall, the feathers of the 10-odd red falcons simultaneously stood up, seeming incomparably vigilant. Even the imperial guards on the side could feel their fear. As for the red geese perching on the side of the pavilion, their reactions were even more unbearable. They were so frightened that they collapsed to the ground, not even daring to stand. What sort of bird was this? The imperial guards were somewhat confused. They warily looked in that direction and subconsciously tightened their grip on the spears in their hands. At this moment, the red-cloud chelan that had been staring blankly at the distant black goat suddenly raised its head and looked up. Xue Xingchuan, who had been mentally sharpening his spear in his room, seemed to sense something and followed suit and looked up. On the palace wall, the young Peng suddenly stopped because it had sensed a killing intent. It looked down at the ground, and its gaze fell on the red cloud chelan. It felt that it was a little troublesome. Then it noticed where the killing intent had come from. It looked at the room and realized that it was a very troublesome place. If the golden Peng were an adult, it would naturally not care about the red cloud chelan's provocation, nor would it fear Xue Xingchuan. However, it could not do so now. When it saw the black goat on the lawn of the imperial palace, the gray feathers on its neck instantly fluttered as it felt an intense unease. The world outside the Garden of Zhou was just as full of dangers as it remembered from its previous life, especially this capital of the human race. It was exactly the same as it had been in the past. It had just landed here to play, so how could it have run into so many troubles? Just before the spears of the soldiers of the Imperial Guard approached, it unfurled its wings and flew down the palace wall. In just a few moments, it had flown over the plaza in front of the palace, over several princely estates and 3 straight streets, and finally landed on a distant street. That street was currently bustling with noise and bustling with activity. Standing on the palace wall, one could faintly make out a magnificent carriage slowly advancing on the street. The soldiers saw the strange bird land on the carriage and realized that it had come from Holy Maiden Peak. They thought to themselves, no wonder it's so terrifying. An official hurried over and reported a piece of news that he had just learned. The previous Holy Maiden has abdicated? Su Yorong's successor? Hearing this news, Xue Xingchuan gazed in the direction of that distant street and thought in surprise just what had happened to South Stream Temple. Why had there been such a huge change? To the disciples of South Stream Temple and the common people of the South, Su Yorong was the future Holy Maiden. To the common people of the capital, Su Yorong was their pride because she had grown up here. As the news that Su Yorong had officially succeeded as Holy Maiden of the South spread, the common people of the capital who had lined the streets to welcome her were shocked into silence. And then their cheers shook the heavens and the earth. Children chased after the carriage. Young women waved handkerchiefs and flowers, and pious believers knelt where the carriage passed, incessantly praying and blessing. The gazes of the young men were blazing. Even if the wind was mixed with the light snow and the weather was so cold, it could not reduce the enthusiasm of the capital by even a little. And when the wind rustled the curtain of the carriage, faintly revealing the figure of the girl within, the atmosphere became even more fervent. Many people no longer cared about the reprimands of the Li Palace priests, the obstruction of the city gate department, or the vigilant gazes of the cavalry of the South. They all squeezed through the middle of the street. Although they were ultimately stopped by the cavalry, they could not stop the things in their hands. For a moment, flowers that were extremely rare to see in the middle of winter fell like rain. In just a few moments, the carriage in which Su Yorong resided had become a sea of flowers. Those washed melons and fruits were thrown into the 100-some carriages as if they were worthless. In the carriage behind, Yi Xiaoyan extended her hand and took a bright red Holy Maiden fruit. She took a light bite and felt that it was sweet and sour, her eyes squinting in joy. Of course, just like the other senior sisters in the carriage, her joy came more from the enthusiasm of the people of the capital. When she thought about how the Holy Maiden was so beloved by the people of Zhou, it could be assumed that after the confluence of the North and South, the status of Holy Maiden Peak would not necessarily decline. It might even be better. The unease caused by the temple master's swift departure was greatly reduced. With 70% joy and 30% pride, they thought, The rumor that Zhou Yuren entered the capital was probably just like this. When Zhou Yuren entered the capital, he truly was almost killed. I remember when I was still young, I was standing on Clear Lake Restaurant with a cousin of the scholar's estate, peeping. That excitement, perhaps because she saw Su Yurong and recalled her younger self, the Tianhai Divine Empress revealed a rare expression of nostalgia. However, it was only for a few moments before she returned to her usual indifferent appearance. If I don't want to be killed, I have to be a little thicker on my skin, and I also have to make my body a little stronger. In the eyes of the common people, Su Yurong had always been a quiet and indifferent fairy, and it was only in front of her holy maiden teacher and the Empress that she was the most natural. She said, being thick-skinned is also not a good thing. The Divine Empress looked at her, a warm expression in her eyes. Tenderly, she said, "What's so good about being thin-skinned? Just look at how your little face is slightly red." There was naturally a deeper meaning in these words. Whether it was being thick-skinned or having a stronger body, they were both suggestions the Divine Empress had given her. If she wanted to sit stably on the position of Temple Master of South Stream Temple and ultimately become the holy maiden acknowledged by all of the South, in the Divine Empress's view, being vicious and merciless was a necessary condition. To be thick-skinned was to be vicious. Only when one was strong enough would one have the strength to be vicious. If you want to make your body a little stronger, shouldn't we start eating? Mo stood on the side, currently arranging the dishes. Seeing Su Yorong's somewhat dazed appearance, she knew that perhaps she did not want to respond, or perhaps she had let go of her thoughts just like when she was young. She smiled and changed the topic. The Divine Empress said, "Children these days don't really like listening to us old fellows talk." Su Yurong softly replied, "The Empress is not old. The Empress will never be old." Mo shivered as she listened. "I haven't seen you in a few years, but your little mouth is still as sweet as ever. Don't talk while eating." The Divine Empress took up her chopsticks, placed a dish in Su Yurong's bowl, and then began to eat. There were no eunuchs or maids in the massive palace hall, only the three of them. It seemed very spacious. Especially after they began to eat, there was no more sound. The scene was rather strange. A new chapter in the book of Choosing Heaven has already begun. At this time, the leader and I have already passed through the Shanghai Pass. I know that we are very slow, just like writing a book, but this is the way to be steady. Let me report to everyone, because the stock manuscript is truly almost finished, in order to be able to continuously update it as much as possible in the next period of time, it will become a new chapter. I hope that everyone knows. Chapter 507. After Mo prepared the dishes, she scooped herself a bowl of rice and sat across Su Yurong. The two looked at each other and smiled. If it was Chun Chong Sheng and Tang 36, they wouldn't be able to stand such a strange scene, but they were used to it. Just like many years ago, when the queen was eating, she was very serious. She didn't allow anyone to talk and could only communicate with her eyes. Su Yurong and Mo had communicated with their eyes countless times. They had a tacit understanding and could easily tell what the other was thinking. But at that time, the content of their conversation was which dish was delicious and which dish was not. The queen seemed to be in a good mood today. She had already eaten 3 times. Last night, the queen said she was going to take away the position of prime minister. It seemed like she meant it. Otherwise, why would she be so depressed today that she couldn't even drink her favorite by sea soup? But today, they were talking about something else. Mo looked at her and blinked her eyes. She was asking her what she thought about Chun Chong Sheng and the engagement. Su Yurong looked down and didn't answer. She just moved the chopsticks forward a little bit. Mo noticed this detail and began to sympathize with Chun Chong Sheng. She remembered clearly that when Su Yurong was unhappy, she would subconsciously tighten her grip on the chopsticks. Then the chopsticks would move forward. One year, she saw little Su Yurong holding chopsticks like that. That afternoon, in the palace where Pingguo lived, there were more than a dozen non-venomous snakes. Then, that night, Pingguo's face was painted into the big flower face in the opera. The eunuchs and maids were guarding outside of the palace. They weren't surprised by the scene in the palace. Their expressions didn't change. There weren't many people who had the right to eat with the Divine Queen. Su Yurong was one of them. This had nothing to do with her identity as the Holy Maiden of the South. Since she was little, the queen would often take her into the palace and eat with her. At that time, besides Su Yurong, there was also Mou, Princess Pingwa, and Prince Chenlu. Later on, when Prince Chenlu passed the age of 16, he rarely stayed in the palace. He also had less time to eat with the empress. As for the Princess of Pingwa, it was said that tonight she went to the West Mountain Temple outside the city to burn incense. Everyone understood that it was because Her Highness the Princess didn't want to face Su Yurong, whom she envied for so many years, so she avoided her. After lunch, Mou stayed in the palace to deal with files. The divine queen stood up and said to Su Yurong, "Follow me." Su Yurong followed her to the highest point in the capital. Standing on the dew platform and gazing at the streets of the capital, gazing at the distant mausoleum of books, Su Yurong thought of the times when she played here as a child, and a happy smile appeared on her face. "This is the first time you've smiled today." The divine empress held her hands behind her back and stood at the edge of the dew platform, not turning her head. Su Yurong stopped smiling and walked behind her. She said slowly, "The pressure came suddenly. I don't know how to deal with it." This was naturally referring to the successor of the Saintess of the South. The divine empress said, "The so-called Holy Maiden is just a statue of a god. With your ability of comprehension, what's so difficult about it?" Su Yurong knew that this was how the empress had always viewed the position of the Saintess of the South. There was no way to change it. She smiled and said nothing. "I do know where your stress comes from." The divine empress turned around and looked at her. She thought of the scene in the Garden of Zhou that she had seen that night on the pond in the cold palace. She looked at her with a smile that was not a smile and said, "The word love is the most harmful. If you can avoid it, then avoid it." Su Yurong was slightly surprised. She felt that the empress seemed to have noticed something, but that matter could not be known by anyone. Not even he did he not know? The divine empress did not continue this topic. Her gaze passed over her shoulder and fell on those distant mountains to the south that were gradually covered in snow. She asked, before she left, "What did she want to say to me?" Su Yurong calmly replied. Master said that he hoped that the empress would not worry too much about the affairs of the state and would spend more of her days by herself. The divine empress was somewhat displeased at these words. She said in a slightly chilly voice, "Truly foolish." This matter involved her own teacher. Although Su Yurong felt rather helpless, she was still forced to say a few words in defense. The divine empress said, "Back then, the chief princess was too outstanding in the great western continent. In the end, she was feared and even feared by her own younger brother. In the end, that good-for-nothing would even faint from fear upon seeing her. In the end, she had no other choice. It was also because of the attitude of her parents that she became somewhat disheartened and married off to the distant White Emperor's city. Now it seems that your master was just as foolish as her." Su Yurong quietly thought, if the chief princess had become the queen of the great western continent, or if she had become the empress of White Emperor's city, just which life would have been happier? Other than herself, who could say for sure? It's not easy for a woman to survive in this world. And it's even more difficult for a woman to have her own position. To be like us, to be able to stand at the highest position, is an even more difficult task. Putting aside that idiot Wuqiong Bai, your master's talent, comprehension, and intelligence can be said to be 1 in 10,000. I originally thought that she would be different from those other foolish women. But in the end, such a clever woman, why can't she overcome the barrier of love? The divine empress's expression became abnormally cold. "What do you mean live? For what reason can a woman only live?" Su Yurong thought a matter before coming here and softly said, "Martial Uncle Su said that the empress would definitely say this, that even the words would be the same." The divine empress slightly arched her brows. "Oh, then what did little Su say?" In the present world, amongst those experts that had stepped into the divine domain, Su Li and the Holy Maiden of the South were half a generation later than the Pope and the Divine Empress. Moreover, because of their complicated attitudes towards Su Li, all the other saints besides the Holy Maiden would refer to him as little Su. It seemed like this was the only way to express their somewhat annoyed attitude towards Su Li. Because in their view, Su Li was a problem. Martial Uncle Su wanted me to say to the Empress. Su Yurong glanced at her, then continued. It's not easy to be alone, so why force yourself? Hearing Su Li's message, the Divine Empress fell silent for a very long time. Then she suddenly began to laugh, a laugh brimming with magnanimity and disdain. Empress, don't blame Master. It's already not easy for her to convince Martial Uncle Su to travel the 4 seas with her. Starting from the autumn of last year, both the Great Zhou dynasty and the various powers of the South had begun their preparations, seemingly already certain that the confluence of the North and South was inevitable. At the time, many people did not understand. Even important figures like Xue Xingchuan, who knew that this was being carried out, could not understand. Su Li was clearly still at Mount Li. So why was it that when the saints pushed for this matter, they did not consider his stance in the slightest? It turned out that it was because the Holy Maiden of the South had convinced Su Li to distance himself from the grievances of the secular world, to no longer care about these matters. The Divine Empress had said that the Holy Maiden of the South could not overcome the barrier of love, but how could Su Li possibly overcome it? The word love was a fetter, the prerequisite for the confluence of the North and South. The Divine Empress's words were extremely unyielding and mocking, because she was somewhat sorrowful. Your master spent her most beautiful years guarding Holy Maiden Peak, while he ate, drank, and played outside. He lived a carefree and happy life for so many years, found a demon princess as his lover, and even gave birth to a daughter. Nothing was delayed, and in the end, when he was tired of playing, he went back to find her, and then they watched the sunset together. How beautiful was that? It said that governing a country is like playing chess. Even if it was, I still wouldn't trade pieces with my enemies, because it's not worth it. In this world, there were only 2 people of the same sex that could communicate with her as equals in the spiritual world. Just like this, one of them was gone, and it was because of man, the reason that she could not accept. Su Yurong did not respond, because she was speaking of her elder, and also because, in truth, there were times when she thought this way. She left just like that, leaving a girl like you behind. Could it be that she wasn't worried? The Divine Empress gazed at Su Yurong and slightly arched her brows. In the end, isn't it still up to me to worry? It's true that when you're with a man, you become stupid. When you're with me, you're smarter than anyone else. Su Yurong smiled. In any case, I was raised by the Empress. It's fine if the Empress teaches me for a few more years. It's not teaching, it's an exchange. The Divine Empress nodded at her. This was a form of courtesy. Su Yurong was very shocked, but then she quickly calmed down and seriously returned the courtesy. She was not a saint, but she was already the Holy Maiden of the South. From this moment onwards, she and the Empress had to speak as equals, even if it was only on the surface. Since you're the Holy Maiden of the South, you must consider the Southerners more. This is your foundation, even if in the future you need to oppose me. Understood. Just like I said at the very beginning, men can't bear to see us high and mighty, so the generations of holy maidens before your master rarely left South Stream Temple. On the surface, they were studying the heavenly tome monoliths and forgot about the world of mortals. But in reality, they also understood that it was enough to maintain their sense of existence. But they also couldn't allow their sense of existence to be too strong. If you don't want to become a statue of God, then you can't do this. Then what should I do? Men don't like us high and mighty, so we have to be high and mighty, and we have to step on them until they can't speak, and even if they want to oppose us, they won't dare. The Divine Empress expressionlessly said. Su Yurong knew that these seemingly simple and crude words were the will of the Empress, a reminder for her future career as Holy Maiden. But it was even more of a request for the upcoming battle. She could not lose to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng sat by the lake in the Orthodox Academy in a daze. The white crane stood by his side, also in a daze. Fine snow descended from the sky, falling upon the white crane's body, adding to its holiness. When it fell upon his body, it seemed like his hair had turned white from worry. What should I do? He worriedly asked the white crane, "If there's really no way to avoid her, and we have to fight her, how should we fight?" The white crane slightly tilted its head and looked at him, as if saying, "You should ask her about this or a matter, not me." He thought for a very long time, and finally softly said to himself, "If it really doesn't work, then I'll just lose to her." In the light snow, Su Yurong held an umbrella as she walked through the streets of the capital. There was not a single disciple of South Stream Temple at her side, nor were there any priests of the Li Palace or guards of the Imperial Palace. She walked alone. For some reason, she had not changed her appearance today. She was as beautiful as a fairy, but she did not attract anyone's gaze, much less reveal her identity. The people in the food stalls by the street, the laborers squatting on the doorsteps eating noodles, did not seem to see her under the umbrella. Perhaps it was because the umbrella in her hand was not ordinary. The umbrella seemed rather old and dusty. It was the yellow paper umbrella. Chapter 508. As she walked under the bridge of helplessness, she was almost knocked down by an Ani hurrying home to avoid the snow. Just as the Ani was about to fall, she reached out to support her. Only then did the Ani realize that there was a girl holding an umbrella under the bridge. After expressing her thanks, she looked at the girl's thin dress and worriedly asked, "Miss is wearing so little. Aren't you cold?" Su Yurong shook her head and continued to walk into the snow with the umbrella. From the Imperial Palace to the southern part of the city, she saw streets of the past. After crossing a stone bridge, she saw the cornices of her home and the clearly newly painted walls. Even someone as calm as her Tao heart couldn't help but feel slightly perplexed at this moment. From the moment the Southern diplomatic mission entered the capital, the gates of the divine general of the East Estate were wide open. Not to mention the crowds of people waiting on the streets in the snow. Even the eyes of the stewards and servants of the divine general's estate were about to turn green. Su Yurong walked over with the umbrella. Under everyone's gazes, she entered the divine general of the East Estate. No one noticed how she had entered. Those stewards and servants who had been busy preparing for this day for dozens of days were all stunned, thinking, "Who is this person?" With a soft sound, she closed the umbrella and lightly knocked on the gate of the divine general's estate, shaking the snow off the umbrella to the ground. With the sound of sobbing, Schwanger ran toward the gate. However, she had already stood for several hours, and her legs were a little sore. In her agitated state of mind, when she arrived in front of Su Yurong, she couldn't stand steadily and almost knelt down. Su Yurong reached out to support her. "How come I never saw you make such a formal greeting before? In the years I wasn't here, who started to teach you manners?" Of course, these words were meant to be teasing, but Schwanger couldn't laugh. She could only cry, and then, feeling embarrassed, she incessantly wiped at her tears with her sleeve. The meticulously applied makeup on her face was instantly ruined. Only now did the people of the divine general's estate react. Mother Hua quickly walked forward, her lips trembling, but she couldn't speak. "The young lady has returned," someone shouted. The firecrackers instantly exploded and fireworks illuminated the dusky, snowy sky. In the midst of the clamor, someone else shouted, "Right now, you can't call her young lady, you have to call her holy maiden. Welcome, Saintess." Seeing the gate quickly close, the crowd that had been waiting in the snow for a long time dispersed with a boom, spreading the news in all directions. Phoenix had returned. "You're wearing so little. What if you catch a cold?" Madame Su held Su Yurong's hand, her face full of concern, tears dripping down. "How can my Phoenix child be frozen by the snow of the mortal world?" Su Shurji gently stroked his beard and said with a smile, looking like a proud and kind father. He sighed with emotion and said, "I haven't seen you for several years. You've really grown up. You've actually really become the saintess." Although from the first day she entered South Stream Temple, he and many others had basically confirmed that his daughter would assuredly become the Holy Maiden of the South, he had never imagined that this day would come so quickly. With this thought, he couldn't help but feel somewhat agitated. Pride and satisfaction took up 70%. Relief and relaxation took up 30%. He knew that even if he had other thoughts, the Divine Empress would not treat him as she did in the past. She would always leave him some face. As for the Tian Hai clan and the ministers of the court, who would still dare to mock him behind his back? As for those fellows that had once embarrassed him, he suddenly thought of Chun Changsheng. His mood suddenly became uneasy, and his complexion became rather unsightly. In everyone's imagination, the holy maiden was assuredly beautiful and otherworldly, sacred and dignified, serious in speech and manner, sitting upright and still. Although this sort of impression was not necessarily correct, it was already impossible to break. Even Su Yurong, when she occasionally appeared in front of the common people in these past few years, although she could not walk like the other senior and junior sisters of South Stream Temple, walking without wind or as pure as a white lotus, she still paid great attention to her words and actions, doing her best to only smile and not speak. Only in front of the divine empress and her master, the holy maiden, would she act more naturally, speaking like a junior and saying a few interesting things. Only in front of Shuang, the maid that had grown up with her, would she truly relax, such as right now. She incessantly rolled around on the bed, her black hair disheveled. Finally, she spread out her arms and lay flat on the bed, sighing, "It's still this bed that's more comfortable to sleep on. Young lady, this is too indecent." Shuang'er hurriedly found a blanket and draped it over Su Yurong's body, then sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her in a daze. She was very happy, but for some reason, the rims of her eyes gradually reddened. Su Yurong asked, "Just what's wrong? Could it be that someone really dares to bully you?" When she had just entered the estate, she had asked, but at the time, she had been joking. She was keenly aware that no one in the Su estate would dare to bully Shuang'er. Because of her orders, presumably not even her mother would give her any attitude. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. She naturally wanted to know why. Shuang'er wiped her tears and looked at her, hesitating to speak. In the end, she sadly said, "But what if someone bullies young lady?" Su Yurong smiled and said, "Silly girl, you're still so silly. Who dares to bully me? You don't know, but in the garden of Zhou, I met Nank, the demon princess that I mentioned to you in the letter. If it was one-on-one, I would—" "Young lady, you know who I'm talking about," Shuang'er said to her. Su Yurong sat up and slowly tied up her black hair. Then she hugged her knees in silence, thinking about something. Shuang'er was keenly aware that when the young lady was alone, she would often stare blankly like this. When she was small, she had always been like this. She looked very pitiful, completely unlike the calm and magnanimous person she was in front of the world. Now that her young lady was like this, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. "Young lady, I didn't mean to make you angry. Don't think about it." Su Yurong looked at the bright lamp on the table and suddenly asked, "There's something I want to ask you." Shuang'er asked, "What is it?" Su Yurong turned her head to her and calmly asked, "Back then, you said she and Princess Luluo were in the Orthodox Academy. You saw it with your own eyes?" Shuang'er was somewhat anxious. "Young lady, it's not easy for you to return home. Why bring up that shameless person?" Although she didn't admit it, the words shameless person were enough to explain many things. Su Yurong didn't ask any more questions. Hugging her knees, she gazed out the window at the snowflakes drifting down. She was quiet for a very long time. In the past, when she returned to the capital, she definitely wouldn't want to go out again. But today, for some reason, she didn't want to stay at home. She wanted to go out and see. Perhaps it was because compared to the last 2 times she returned to the capital was somewhat different. For instance, the night lights in the unending palace had increased by quite a few. The pier of the Bridge of Helplessness had been knocked askew by a grain ship last summer and was currently being repaired. The forest by New North Bridge had, for some reason, grown much denser, and it was said that the old ivy-covered gate of the Orthodox Academy had been replaced with a new one. That fellow was in the capital. He was separated from her by 11 straight streets. If a normal person were to walk, they would only need an hour, and this was because the roads were slippery in the snow. If she were to walk, she would only need a few moments. If she were to ride the white crane, she would need even less time, only needing the blink of an eye. The snow outside the window suddenly became disorderly, and her mood also became somewhat disorderly. Blinking her eyes, she realized that the white crane had landed in the courtyard. She stood up, put on a large cloak, and walked out of the room. Schwanger hurriedly hugged the heater to her chest and followed. The white crane was combing its feathers in the snow. A very unpleasant and strange cry resounded in the night sky as the gray baby Pung also descended. It had gone off to play again, and only when it had discovered the white crane did it fly over. The moment it landed, it burrowed under the white crane's wings, as if trying to curry favor, but also as if trying to provoke the white crane to pay attention to it. The white crane straightened its neck, seeming very helpless, but it had no intention of driving it away. This small courtyard was a forbidden area of the divine general of the East Estate. Without her permission, no one could enter, not even Su Shurji or Madame Su. There was no need to worry that the baby Pung would scare anyone. "What kind of bird is this?" Schwanger asked as she looked at the simple and gray bird. In her eyes, this bird was truly rather ugly. Yet the white crane, which had always been known for its love of cleanliness, actually did not resist this bird's closeness. This caused her to be rather shocked. "A pheasant," Su Yurong replied. The baby Pung arched its head out from under the white crane's wings and gave her a somewhat resentful glance. Holy Maiden Peak is truly not an ordinary place. The pheasants on the peak all look so fierce. Schwanger clapped her hands in praise. Suddenly, she thought of something and said, then I have to go and prepare some fresh water and fruit. Originally, I only prepared the white crane." Hearing these words, the resentment in the baby Peng's eyes grew even heavier. It had already lived on Holy Maiden Peak as a vegetarian for half a year. Only occasionally, when Su Yurong went into town to play mahjong, would it be able to eat some meat, dried meat, pork ribs, and the like. Today, it had come to the bustling capital. As it flew by, it had seen so many fragrant and tender humans, as well as those cultivators who were clearly chewy and nutritious. It had long since become gluttonous, but in the end, and it was still eating fruit. It must be known that although it had never eaten human flesh in this life, the impression left in its soul from its last life had not been forgotten. This pheasant likes to eat meat. Su Yurong glanced at the baby Pung. It was just a very ordinary glance, but the baby Pung felt like its soul had been washed in the coldest ice water for 3 days and 3 nights. The scorching desire it had just developed instantly vanished without a trace. It no longer dared to have those thoughts. "If you have blue lobster home, make some for it to try." Hearing these words, the baby Pung was very happy. It incessantly shook its head. The memories of its previous life in its soul told it that the meat of blue lobster was extremely delicious. Schwanger somewhat helplessly said, "We don't have any at home." Su Yurong was a little surprised. Her family knows that she likes to eat Clear Lake Restaurant's blue lobster. Logically speaking, just like the last 2 times she returned to the capital, they should have prepared quite a lot. Why isn't there any? The entire capital can't eat blue lobster right now. Schwanger hesitated, then said, "Because the Orthodox Academy bought Clear Lake Restaurant. Only there can you eat it." Su Yurong was a little taken aback. She didn't think that she would so quickly hear the name of the Orthodox Academy. The baby Pung, on the other hand, was thinking about what sort of place the Orthodox Academy was. It had to find a chance to eat all the people inside, and then slowly eat those blue lobsters. The white crane suddenly gave a low and clear cry. Only now did Su Yurong realize that the white crane had been in the Orthodox Academy for this entire half a day. Presumably, it had been playing with that guy. Schwanger went to get some other meat. Draped over her cloak, she stood in the night snow, thinking about a few things. He was in the capital, 11 streets away. An hour would pass in a moment. Chapter 509. She had been thinking about these things before, and now that she thought about them again, she found it impossible to suppress them. Of course, she wasn't thinking about him, nor did she want to see him. She said to herself, she was just a little curious, wanting to see him, what he was doing, wanting to know how he was spending his time in the capital. In the mausoleum of Zhou, when she had spoken to that fellow about Senior Qiushan and the engagement, she had said that what she cared about the most was following her heart. Now that her heart was set, she naturally no longer hesitated. She returned to her room and changed her clothes. Taking the umbrella, she walked out of the snowy courtyard. Schwanger returned with a plate of veal and asked in shock, Young lady, you're still going out so late? Yes. Are you going to see Grand Lady M.O.? Yes. The Orthodox Academy was very quiet at night, but the 100 Flowers Lane outside the academy was very lively. The lights of the restaurants shone on the falling snowflakes, coupled with the smoke generated by the hot air in the restaurant. The scene seemed somewhat illusory. Su Yurong quietly stood at the end of the lane. Her white ceremonial robes and red cloaked the most beautiful part of this illusory scene. Because of the yellow paper umbrella, no one was able to sense her existence. The people in the restaurant did not have the fortune of seeing this scene, so they naturally did not have any misgivings. As usual, they spoke loudly, drank to their heart's content, called out to their friends, and teased the girls. The music would occasionally be interrupted, but the joyous singing and laughter never ceased. Su Yurong slightly creased her brow as she listened to the obscene songs coming from the restaurant. She was very curious about the new Orthodox Academy and had many conjectures, but she had not imagined that just a wall away was a place of filth and corruption. He's already the principal, yet he doesn't care. For some inexplicable reason, she felt a great deal of dissatisfaction towards that fellow. The night breeze blew, and the snowflakes were thrown into disorder. She noiselessly flew over the academy wall, the Orthodoxy cavalry patrolling in the snow completely unaware. Landing within the academy wall, she was faced with a lake. A row of houses stood by the lake, and she could faintly smell the scent of firewood. She guessed that this was the kitchen, so she walked over. After confirming that there was no one inside, she pushed open the door and casually glanced around. The food is truly not bad. She gazed at the food in the Orthodox Academy's kitchen and nodded in satisfaction, but she did not feel that her role had deviated. Note, when she saw the pile of blue lobster shells in the food processing room, she finally believed Schwanger's words. She shook her head and thought to herself, he really did move Clear Lake Restaurant over. That young master of the Wunshui Tangs really is a strange person. Walking along the lakeside to the other side, she saw the big banyan tree. Then she saw the light and the building on the other side of the low wall. She recalled the scenes he had mentioned in the snowy temple of the plains of the unsetting sun, the things he had said, as well as the rumors about him. She guessed that that place should be the library, and it was in that building that he had found his fated star. Not far behind the great banyan tree was a small building. Compared to the bright and bustling lights of the other parts of the Orthodox Academy, this small building was much quieter. She directly pushed open the door to the house and walked in with a yellow paper umbrella in hand. Then she stopped. This was the first floor. She stopped in front of the door of a room. She could smell the faint smell of medicine from the crack of the door. There was a bed in the room behind the door. Zhixio was lying on the bed. Although his injuries had gradually healed, the wounds on his meridians had not completely healed. Therefore, he still needed to lie down quietly most of the time. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. He slowly turned around and looked in the direction of the door. His expression was grave and solemn, as if he was facing a great foe. His current expression was even more cautious than when he had faced the demon general couple in the Garden of Zhou. His gaze fell on the door, and his pupils constricted. His right hand slowly moved through the bedding and gripped the demon commander's banner sword. The moment he gripped the hilt, many black hairs sprouted from the back of his hand, and his constricted pupils rapidly turned blood red. He was ready to fight, even ready to transform without hesitation, because he could sense that the person outside the door was very strong. In terms of cultivation, the person outside the door was about the same as him, but he felt a very dangerous feeling. This was the crux of the problem. Because of his special bloodline talent and the harsh environment in which he had grown up, he had been accompanied by killing since he was a child, hunting demons for a living. It could be said that the wolf youth Zhixio was the young expert most skilled in battle or perhaps in close-quarters combat. In his understanding, and even in the understanding of everyone else, it was impossible for anyone at the same level to defeat him. Back when he had not even reached Ethereal Opening, he had already thought of killing the Ethereal Opening Gohanshi. This was proof of this. Yet now, he felt that even if he was not injured and had completely recovered his peak strength, he would still not be a match for the person outside the door. This feeling was very strange. He was sure that he had never exchanged blows with the person outside the door, but he felt like he had exchanged blows with him countless times, and he had never won. It was this feeling of danger and this strange state of mind that made him rather sensitive. So he was wary, even uneasy. Just who was the person outside the door? Su Yurong held the yellow paper umbrella and calmly looked at the door, saying nothing. She had already guessed who the person in the room was. She had never met him, but they had actually met many times. They had met on the stone wall in front of the Six Ivies and all the other schools. That was the proclamation of Azure Sky. They had met at the highest point of the proclamation of Azure Sky. In the last 3 years, she had always been at the top of the proclamation of Azure Sky, and that person had always been second. In the past, she would never have missed a chance to exchange blows with him, but now that she knew that he had not recovered from his heavy injuries, she naturally would not send him an invitation. After a while, she turned and walked upstairs, making no effort to drown out the sound of her footsteps. From the sound of his footsteps, Zhixio could tell that he had no ill intentions. But just who was this person? Why had he entered the Orthodox Academy at night? Suddenly, he recalled the most sensational news in the capital today, as well as the white crane that had stayed by the lake for half a day. His face instantly revealed shock. In the blink of an eye, he recalled what Chen Chongqing was doing, and his shock instantly transformed into sympathy and pity. Su Yurong went straight to Chen Chongqing's room. To her, this was not a very difficult task. She did not need to understand the privileges of the principal, only to understand him. She remembered very clearly that in the Garden of Zhou, no matter how busy he was, running day and night without time to bathe, he would still do his utmost to wash his face and hands clean. This floor was very clean, extremely clean, so clean that it made one's hair stand on end. There were no cobwebs, no scraps of paper, no trash. There wasn't even a speck of dust in the cracks, in the wooden boards in the corners. The floor of the walkway seemed to have been washed 10 times a day, so clean that one could even see a person's shadow. Su Yurong glanced at the dress she was wearing and felt rather uneasy. Aren't all people with mysophobia a little abnormal? She walked towards the room, the soles of her shoes making no sound on the walkway, leaving behind only the snow and mud outside the building. Arriving at the door, she turned her head to look at the clear footprints on the clean walkway, a satisfied smile appearing on her face. After confirming that there was no one in the room, she pushed open the door and walked in. Note, the principal's wife is inspecting. There's still one more chapter tonight. But this does not mean that I have to write 2 chapters every day because my energy is not enough. Chapter 510. This was a very simple room. There was only one bed, one desk, 2 rows of bookshelves, 1 wardrobe, and 3 basins. Since she was a woman, the first thing Su Yurong did after entering the room was to open the wardrobe. The wardrobe was also very simple. It was basically just plain colored clothes. Most of them were the uniforms of the Tradition Academy. Other than the faint scent of soap leaves, there was no other fragrance. She was very satisfied with this, but when she saw the 50 towels and handkerchiefs neatly stacked at the bottom of the wardrobe, she was silent for a long time. She closed the wardrobe and walked to the bookshelf. She randomly took out a few books and found that they were all the most popular novels in the capital. So she was silent for a while. He had read the Scrolls of the Way since he was young. So now he didn't want to improve? Suddenly, she saw a small thing on the bookshelf. Her expression was a little startled. It was a bamboo dragonfly. It was obviously very old. It had already turned yellow and seemed to have been soaked in water. The edges were almost rotten. She felt it was familiar. After thinking for a long time, she remembered that she put it in a letter to him when she was very young. Thinking of the things that happened when she was young, she was a little lost. She looked at this bamboo dragonfly. After so many years, he still kept it. Okay, he didn't keep it very well, but he still kept it. So he was a nostalgic person? She was a little satisfied, but then for some reason, she was a little angry. Then she realized that the reason for the anger was also her. So should she be angry or happy? She thought about this question, but she didn't know that there was a smile on her face. She carefully put the bamboo dragonfly back on the bookshelf. She walked to the bed. Of course, she didn't sit down. She just looked at it. The bedding was very neatly folded and very clean. She couldn't see any dirty spots on the bedsheet or the pillow towel. Not even a hair. Wait, what was that? There was a hair that was hard to find in the shadow of the pillow towel. Su Yurong was silent. That hair was very long and thin. It was obviously a woman's hair. Suddenly, she felt a little cold. After a while, she realized that the window of the room was open. It was snowing tonight. The snowflakes floated in from the window and wet the corner of the desk. She was a little confused. Chen Changsheng was such a calm and collected person. Why didn't he close the window when he left the room? Even if the wind and snow didn't matter. What if it was dust and leaves that came in? Could it be that this unclosed window was left open for someone? Su Yurong suddenly came to her senses. This kind of suspicion, this kind of endless calculation was not used in battle or cultivation, but was used to uncover the truth of this strand of hair. When did he become such a person? She shook her head and walked to the wardrobe. She opened the door and prepared to take out a towel to wipe off the snow on the desk. However, what happened in the next moment made her understand that these suspicions and anger were not because she had become unbearable, but because that fellow was unbearable to begin with. Snowflakes danced in the air, and a faint fragrance wafted over. A woman leaped over the window and landed in the room. At the same time, Su Yurong heard another sentence. Don't blame Big Sister for not telling you. That fiancé of yours has a heavy grudge against you, so you have to be careful. When her temper flares up, tiska fiske. Speaking of which, you must not tell her that I often come here to sleep, or else, suddenly, the teasing voice stopped abruptly, because that woman suddenly realized that the person behind the wardrobe door was not Shen Changsheng. Su Yurong closed the wardrobe door and turned to the woman. She felt that her master was right. The matters of the world were most unbearable to be spoken of. Whatever you said, the matter would often develop into the way you said it would. For example, before leaving the divine general's estate, Shuang had asked her what she was going to do, but she hadn't told the truth. She said she was going to see MOU. Thus, at this moment, she saw MOU. But it wasn't in the Imperial Palace, nor was it in MOU's Orange Garden. It was in a room on the 3rd floor of the Orthodox Academy. MOU's mouth was slightly open, but she couldn't say anything for a long time. Then, she gave an unnatural smile and asked in a raspy voice, "Can you pretend you didn't see me?" Su Yurong calmly looked at her and said, "I already saw you." MOU used her right hand to support her forehead and her left hand to point at her. "Don't be in such a hurry to ask. Let me first understand the current situation." Su Yurong calmly said, "Take your time to think." At this moment, MOU was truly somewhat speechless. Her mind was in a mess. She originally wanted to take advantage of Su Yurong's return to the capital to tease Chen Changsheng. At the same time, she also really wanted to warn him. Who would have thought that she would run into the main character in Chen Changsheng's room? Moreover, she even heard those words. "First, we should come to an agreement. That is, you need to calmly listen to my explanation." MOU put down her hand and looked at her seriously. "That little temper part was me speaking ill of you behind your back. But regarding sleeping, you definitely can't misunderstand." Su Yurong smiled and said, "Continue." MOU saw her expression and knew that she was truly angry. She sighed in her heart and said helplessly, "Sleeping is just sleeping. It's not the kind of sleeping you think." "Oh, then what kind of sleeping is it?" Su Yurong's smile became even more gentle. MOU helplessly said, "In any case, you definitely can't misunderstand." Su Yurong looked her up and down. She saw that she was wearing a red nightgown. Her feet were bare. Her black hair fell over her shoulders. It was slightly wet and had a few snowflakes. It seemed that she had just taken a bath. "Yes, please tell me. How can I not misunderstand?" MOU followed her gaze and looked at herself. Her heart skipped a beat. Last time, after Chen Changsheng mentioned it once, she actually came here every time after taking a bath. It gradually became a habit. Tonight, she naturally came here like this too. Then, even if she jumped into the sea of stars, she wouldn't be able to clear her name. As the saying goes, after breaking a jar, one can often gain the upper hand by a show of strength. MOU was also like this. Seeing that she couldn't explain clearly, she became much more confident. She looked at Su Yurong and said, This story is very long. I think you won't be interested to hear it. What about you? I really want to hear your story. Why didn't you stay at home on your first day back to the capital? What did you do here? Su Yurong walked to the window. She didn't speak and didn't look at her. The light from outside the wall fell on the snow and shone on her face. Mou looked at her beautiful face that even she was a bit jealous of. Her eyes moved slightly, and she continued to ask. The holy maiden's heart was moved? Su Yurong looked at her and asked, "At that time, you said in the letter that he and the little black dragon. Is it true or false?" "It's absolutely true. At that time, he and she were hugging each other." And Mou saw that she could shift her gaze and didn't want to miss this chance. She wanted nothing more than to use the divine empress name to swear. But she suddenly thought of the previous matter and said uncertainly, "But just like when you saw me come in and heard what I said, what you see may not be the truth." Su Yurong said nothing and seemed to be deep in thought. And Mou thought of something and asked in disbelief, "Why are you asking this? You're not really interested in him, are you? No wonder you came to see him on the first day back to the capital." "I have an engagement with him. Coming to see him after returning to the capital is a very natural thing." Su Yurong was very calm. Only the tightly clenched hands behind her back showed that she was actually rather nervous. And Mou didn't think that she would admit it so calmly. She said in slight surprise, "That's not what you said in the letter. In order to break your engagement, I paid a great price. You have to understand that Chun Changsheng is no ordinary person. I offended the principal of the Orthodox Academy, the future pope. If you tell me now that you're really prepared to be together with him, I won't let you off." Su Yurong looked at her damp black hair and nightgown and calmly said, "The price truly isn't small, but he probably won't feel that this is an offense or offense, right?" And Mou found it impossible to refute. Ashamed and indignant, she said, "Others don't know, but you and I both know that the Pope has already annulled the engagement between the two of you. No matter what happens between me and him, with what status do you have to care?" Su Yurong softly said, "You don't need to care." And Mou was quiet for a while, then asked, "Just what are you thinking?" Su Yurong slightly lowered her head and softly said, "It's still better that you don't need to care." Only those who were most familiar with her knew that beneath her calm exterior, she was actually very weak. And Mou looked at her and sighed. "Just suffocate yourself to death." Su Yurong calmly asked, "Where did he go?" And Mou arched her brows. "How would I know? Don't really misunderstand." At this moment, the music outside the courtyard walls suddenly grew louder. And Mou looked in that direction, and even the heavy snowflakes that drifted down with the night wind could not obscure her vision. She saw that the restaurant was brightly lit and the dancers were dancing in the hall. "Don't be angry. He seems to be over there," she said to Su Yurong. Su Yurong looked over. Sure enough, on the highest floor of the restaurant, that fellow was currently drinking wine. At his side were 3 or 4 young men, and there were also many women walking around like butterflies among flowers. What an unrestrained man. She calmly gazed at the restaurant, quietly thinking. At this moment, she saw that the dancer dancing in the hall suddenly lose her footing and fall into that fellow's embrace. For some reason, she found it somewhat difficult to maintain the tranquility of her Tao heart, and her chest began to rise and fall. If Su Yurong comes back, then she comes back. What are you afraid of, and what are you worried about? Don't have any psychological barriers. If you need to fight, then fight. In the restaurant, Tang 36 was holding a pot of wine and hugging a young female singer. He looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "Men and women are equal. As long as you don't hold on to the outdated view that women can't fight, then you can fight." While he was talking, the young female singer in his arms raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were filled with admiration and happiness. The singer next to Chun Changsheng had a slightly bitter expression. It wasn't only because Chun Changsheng was sitting too rigidly. From beginning to end, he didn't even touch a finger. It was also because the entire continent knew who the fiancée of the young principal of the Tradition Academy was. She was just a girl in a brothel. She didn't want to offend the divine general's mansion and that superior phoenix. "I prepare to lose. Do you think it's okay?" Chun Changsheng suddenly said. As soon as he said this, the entire hall was silent. Chapter 511. Of course not. Tang 36 looked into his eyes and said, "You can lose face, but the Orthodox Academy can't. How will His Holiness speak in front of the Empress in the future? Don't forget, this isn't just your problem, but the problem of the entire Orthodoxy." This matter was known by the entire continent, so there was no need to avoid the singers and dancers, but the atmosphere inevitably became oppressive. Tang 36 wanted to improve Chun Changsheng's mood, so he smiled and said, "And don't you want to strengthen the authority of the husband? Didn't you see how shocked the girls were when you said you were going to admit defeat?" Sumo Yu shook his head and said, "These words are inappropriate, regardless of whether His Holiness has annulled their engagement or not. Since Qin Changsheng has confirmed that he doesn't want to continue with the marriage, then you can't use the words strengthen the authority of husband. This matter involves the holy maiden's reputation. Inappropriate." Tang 36 said disinterestedly, "I'm just joking. Right now, the Orthodox Academy only has you two bookworms, that cold-blooded assassin Jishio, and that idiot Xian Yuanpa. I don't even have someone to talk to. How pitiful." Saying this, he snatched the bowl from Chun Changsheng's table and poured out the tea within, replacing it with strong alcohol from Western Pass. Chun Changsheng waved his hand and said, "I said I don't drink." Sumo Yu said, "The weather is cold and the night is snow. It's best to return early." Tang 36 felt very helpless and said, "I'm just helping him relieve some of his pressure, okay?" Today, the white crane had landed by the lake, and Su Yurong had returned to the capital. Chun Changsheng had appeared very quiet, and seemed to be in a rather heavy mood, which was why he had held this banquet in hopes of letting Chun Changsheng vent some of his pressure. Who would have thought that upon arriving at the restaurant, Chun Changsheng and Sumo Yu wouldn't even drink, instead sitting upright and still, clapping their hands and praising the dancers. But this didn't seem like they had come out to play. Looking at the dancing dancers that were constantly spinning in the hall, he suddenly broke into a smile, indescribably elegant and charming, causing the eyes of the young female singer in his embrace to fill with even more adoration. As he smiled, he slightly bent his finger and threw out a pine nut from the plate on the table. Without a sound, the pine nut hit the dancer's knee. It wasn't heavy, but the position was too sensitive. Before the dancer could stand still, she fell into Chun Changsheng's arms. Chun Changsheng quickly supported her and asked with concern, "Are you all right, miss?" The dancer was also a playful person and had seen many things. How could she not know what had happened? She first looked at Tang 36 with slight annoyance, and then looked at Chun Changsheng gently. She breathed out and said softly, "I seem to be a bit drunk." As she spoke, her arms naturally wrapped around Chun Changsheng's neck, and her entire body leaned into his embrace. With a soft body in his arms, Chun Changsheng didn't feel ecstatic. He only felt a little uncomfortable and awkward. Just as he was about to politely help the dancer sit next to him, he suddenly felt as if someone was looking at him in the distant snowy night. That pair of eyes, that probably didn't exist. It wasn't cold, but it made his heart feel extremely uneasy. Therefore, in the next moment, purely subconsciously or even instinctively, he quickly raised his hands. He only wanted to show that he didn't have any improper thoughts towards the dancer. His hands also didn't touch her body, but he didn't realize how funny this action would be in other people's eyes. The restaurant was first silent for a moment, then everyone burst into laughter. Especially Tang 36. He laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out. Su Yurong stood by the window and looked at the scene in the restaurant. When the dancer sat in Chun Changsheng's arms, no matter how calm her heart of Tao was, she couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. Yet in the next moment, she saw Chun Changsheng raise his hands high and heard the laughter coming from the other side of the wall. She also smiled, but she forced herself not to laugh. And Mo Yu saw all the changes in her expression and said, "If you want to laugh, laugh. What's there to hold back?" Su Yurong was still looking at the direction of the restaurant. She saw Chun Changsheng's embarrassed expression. Hearing Mo Yu's words, she finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Ha ha!" Mo Yu was startled by her laughter. She covered her chest and said, "Are you okay? Why are you laughing like an auntie?" Su Yurong's laughter was a bit bold, or perhaps generous. In short, her laughter wasn't like a 16-year-old girl's. It was more like the Annie who sold youtiao and soy milk at the entrance of the 100 Blossom Street. More accurately, it was similar to the Annie who played mahjong with her in the small town. Su Yurong was a bit embarrassed. She pretended to be calm and said, "Look at him. He's like an idiot." Mo, you didn't have the time to look at Chun Changsheng. She was already stunned just by looking at her. She remembered very clearly that when she saw Su Yurong for the first time, Su Yurong was only 5 years old. At that time, she was still a little girl, but she always sat quietly, read, and then cultivated. She was holy and quiet, just like a little saintess. What did she ever see her like this? You can't really like that guy, right? Moyu was very surprised and also very worried. The banquet in the restaurant ended after this bout of laughter. Chun Changsheng's group of 3 climbed over the wall and returned to the Orthodox Academy. Just as they entered the house, the door to the side opened. They looked over and were shocked to see Zhashio standing there, leaning on his walking stick. "You're finally in the mood to walk a few steps today," Tang 36 teased. Zhashio ignored him. He looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "She was here." "Who?" Chun Changsheng was somewhat confused. "Su Yurong." After saying this name, Zhashio closed the door. It seemed like he was preparing to go back to sleep. The 3 of them were very surprised to hear this name. Looking at the tightly shut door, they knew that it would probably be very difficult for them to sleep tonight. Tang 36 walked back to the house and furrowed his brow as he looked around. Then he turned to Chun Changsheng and said apologetically, "She might have seen us drinking wine just now. I'm sorry." Chun Changsheng covered his face and said, "I said I didn't want to go, but you just had to pull me along." Tang 36 felt depressed at his appearance and said, "You're not planning on marrying her, and she doesn't necessarily want to marry you. What are you afraid of her for?" Only now did Chun Changsheng react. He thought to himself, that's right. He felt that his act of covering his face just now was rather shameful. He forced himself to remain calm and said, "That's right. So what if she saw?" Tang 36 sneered. "Why are you pretending to be a man? If you have the ability, then put your hands on the girls." "I'm obsessed with cleanliness." Chun Changsheng looked at him and Su Mou and seriously explained, "It's not that I think those girls are dirty. It's just that I can't get over that mental barrier." Tang 36 unhappily said, "Of course we know. It's not that you think they're dirty. You think everyone is dirty." Su Mou had been very quiet this entire time. Now he suddenly asked, "Why did the Holy Maiden come to the Orthodox Academy?" "That's right." Tang 36 no longer continued his ridicule. Looking at Chun Changsheng, he seriously said, "Was she so angry that she snuck over and prepared to stab you to death?" After a pause, he sighed. "Then she really would be murdering her husband." His words didn't seem like ridicule, but in reality, the ridicule was even thicker. Su Mo, you seemed to have the pearl of wisdom in his grasp, but in reality, he was still wooden. As I just said, since the engagement is no longer valid, Chun Changsheng cannot regard the Holy Maiden as his fiancée. Then even if she really did want to stab Chun Changsheng to death, it wouldn't be considered murdering her husband. It could only be said that she intended to kill him. In reality, Chun Changsheng had already asked the sect to forcefully annul that engagement, but for various reasons, he had never announced it to the public. Su Mo, you looked at Tang 36 and sincerely said, "And she's still the Holy Maiden. You should treat her with some respect." Tang 36 arched his brows. "Besides being better at fighting than me, I don't see any reason to respect her." Just then, Zhishio's voice came from the door. "I've always respected Su Yurong, so you should also respect her." Matters developed much faster than imagined. On the morning of the next day, disciples from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and South Stream Temple paid a visit to the Orthodox Academy. When he thought about how Su Yurong had once come, perhaps even entered his room, Chun Changsheng's mood became rather strange. As a result, the quality of his sleep last night was uncharacteristically poor. When he appeared in front of the 3 disciples from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and South Stream Temple, his eyes were rather dark and he seemed rather weak. The senior sister from South Stream Temple recalled the row of restaurants she had seen before entering the academy and began to speculate. She couldn't help but look at him with some contempt. Chen Changsheng and Zheshio had once met this senior sister from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green in the Garden of Zhou, so they could be considered friends. She gave a somewhat embarrassed laugh, but without any idle chatter, she directly handed over the letter. Ever since the Orthodoxy began the all-school martial exhibition, the Orthodox Academy had received countless similar letters. But when Chen Changsheng took this letter, he still felt it to be rather heavy. The letter was a common challenge, but the person was very special. It was Su Yurong. The battle that the entire continent had been anticipating for a very long time had finally arrived. Chen Changsheng opened the letter and earnestly read through it. From the handwriting, he determined that it was probably not Su Yurong's own handwriting. There was also nothing special in the letter. The most important thing was the date and location. The date was 7 days from now. The location was on the Bridge of Helplessness. Please do not be anxious, because this has nothing to do with the progression of the plot, only with the speed of writing. The plot cannot be moved, so maintaining the rhythm is ultimately the most important. I am only worried that it will affect the mood of the students taking the college entrance examination. In order to prevent everyone from thinking too much about the future and increasing their anxiety, I report to everyone that Chen Su will still be in a few days. Nothing major will happen. Chen Su's victory will not be a tragedy. Spoiler over. Everyone can peacefully enter the examination grounds tomorrow and have fun for these 2 days. Chapter 512. For some reason, when Chen Changsheng thought about how Su Yurong had come to challenge the Orthodox Academy as soon as she returned to the capital, not even wasting a single day, Chen Changsheng felt rather gloomy. The 3 people from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and South Stream Temple saw that he had received the letter and bid farewell. It was rumored that Chen Changsheng had requested the Pope to forcefully annul the engagement. Although it had not been proven, he had never denied it. To South Stream Temple, this was unquestionably the greatest humiliation, so that senior sister had never been kind to Chen Changsheng, even though he was now the principal of the Orthodox Academy. On the contrary, the younger junior sister didn't show any hostility towards Chen Changsheng. Before leaving, she even looked at Chen Changsheng and nodded, as if she had something to say. "That girl is rather strange," Tang 36 said. Chen Changsheng put away the letter and asked, "A rather clean girl. What's strange about her?" Tang 36 said with a grave expression, "From start to finish, that girl didn't even glance at me. She only stared at you. She's called Yi Xiaoyan. She probably just entered the outer sect of South Stream Temple this year." Chen Changsheng reminded, "Last year on the Divine Avenue of the Li Palace, you made her cry in front of so many people. Of course, she doesn't have a good impression of you." Tang 36 finally remembered who that girl called Yi Xiaoyan was. He shook his head and said, "So what? The more it is like this, the deeper her impression of me is. It's said that from hatred comes love." Chen Changsheng couldn't listen any longer. He turned around and walked back into the house. Tang 36 followed behind him and said with some dissatisfaction, "In addition, why did I curse her back then? Wasn't it because I wanted to help you vent your anger? What happened just now? She didn't look at me, but at you. She looked as if she was in love. How could it not be strange?" Chen Changsheng did not turn his head. He said, "Let's not talk about this. Help me think of a plan for what to do next. Didn't we already discuss it last night? We just have to fight." Tang 36 quickened his steps and walked to his side. He turned his head and said uneasily, "You're not really thinking of admitting defeat, are you?" Chen Changsheng thought for a while, then shook his head. Tang 36 reminded, 7 days later on the Bridge of Helplessness, "Don't hold yourself back just because she's pretty. Even though I know it's hard, seeing how unromantic you were last night, it's still possible." Chen Changsheng didn't understand why everyone, whether it was Su Shiji or Tang 36, were so sure that he would change his mind when he looked at Su Yurong. He had asked Tang 36 about this before. At that time, Tang 36's answer was quite simple, but today he seemed to be slightly more serious. "I've never seen Su Yurong, but I've seen many people lose their lives after seeing her." He looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "Just like your stainless sword, As long as it is sharp enough, sharp to the extreme, it can enter the tier of legendary weapons. A person, whether man or woman, as long as they are beautiful enough, beautiful to the extreme, is very frightening. The Zhou Yuan of the past, the young divine empress of the past, and the current Su Yurong are all such people. Chen Changsheng couldn't understand this statement. Tang 36 said, just like a painting, a vase of plum blossoms, a lake of water in autumn, a mountain in the distance. If you think about destroying these, you will feel that it is a sin. Chen Changsheng thought about the scenery and people he had seen on his journey from Xining to the capital and then to Hanxiu City, the plains of the unsetting sun and the rain in Xuanyang City, the maiden on the plains and Wang Pa in the rain. And he had a rough idea. This highly anticipated battle was about to begin in 7 days. After hearing the news, the water under the bridge of helplessness seemed to have become a lot more turbulent. The fastest to react was still the 4 great markets. The influence of this battle was far too great. Many powerful figures would assuredly be present to spectate. Perhaps even the divine empress and the pope would be present. The streets on the east and west sides of the bridge of helplessness began to be cleaned ahead of time. Presumably, when the time came, the imperial court and the Li Palace would have their own arrangements, so it would not be the 4 great markets' turn to build their awnings. However, the 4 great markets would definitely not miss out on the opening for this battle. There were still 7 days before the battle would officially begin. However, it already had an official name, Battle of the Bridge of Helplessness. It seemed like everyone was extremely certain that this battle would be recorded in the annals of history. This had nothing to do with the strength of Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng. No matter how inconceivable their cultivation talents were, even if they could be said to be the youngest upper-level ethereal opening cultivators in all of history, they were still only 16, let alone the battle between Zhou Dufu and Emperor Taizong in Luoyang. Not even the battle in the rain in Xuanyang City not long ago could compare. But the 2 sides of this battle were Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng, and this was enough. There was no need to mention the identities of the Holy Maiden of the South and the principal of the Orthodox Academy. No need to mention the marriage contract, and certainly no need to mention the confrontation between the Tianhai clan and the Li Palace, because no one had ever forgotten these things. As long as these 2 names were mentioned, the events that had occurred in the past year would once more surface in everyone's minds. The entire world would become excited because of this. Everyone in the capital was waiting for the arrival of this battle. Many people in the imperial court and the Li Palace were also making preparations. As the person involved, Chen Changsheng naturally had to make some preparations. Although he had already exchanged blows with many star condensation cultivators, and had even fought against experts on the level of Liang Wangsun and painted armor Xiao Zhang in Xuanyang City, and his opponent, Su Yurong, was only at the upper level of ethereal opening, he would definitely not underestimate or neglect her. He was extremely sure that Su Yurong was much stronger than those initial level star condensation cultivators that he had defeated. If he wanted to defeat a genius like Su Yurong, if he wanted to obtain victory before the bloodline of the true Phoenix, he had naturally prepared his most powerful move. From the moment the date for the duel had been set, he had unsheathed his sword, the intellectual sword. With the assistance of the Li Palace and the Wenshui Tangs, he had obtained countless files related to Su Yurong. He sat in front of the window and began to earnestly read through them, attempting to find the information he needed, enough information to help him calculate and deduce how he should use his sword. He first understood the techniques of South Stream Temple, the history of Holy Maiden Peak, the divergence in Taoist techniques between the north and the south of the orthodoxy, and the results of the successive generations of holy maidens in their comprehension of the heavenly tome monoliths. For these reasons, the Li Palace had sent over countless books, and they had even sent over Su Yurong's notes from the last 2 years of studying the heavenly tome monoliths. Afterwards, he began to understand the divine general of the East Estate, Su Shiji's usual style of leading troops in a battle. Madame Su's personality, where that maid called Schwanger had lived before entering the Su estate, and how she had been brought into the estate by Su Yurong. After he had completely understood and grasped all this information, he finally began the most important step, and That was to understand Su Yurong as a person. There was a lot of information about Su Yurong. Besides the Li Palace, the Wunshui Tangs had also sent over 2 chests. However, if he excluded the information that everyone knew in a few actual battles, there was very little information that was truly useful. Moreover, the vast majority of it was rumors about her in the capital. After she entered Holy Maiden Peak, there were no more records. The more Chen Changsheng read through those files, the more he felt that he could not understand Su Yurong. This was not to say that Su Yurong was a very mysterious young girl. In reality, when she was young, many people of the capital had seen her with their own eyes. People had seen her jump into the canal from the stone bridge. After she had been rescued, people had asked her why she had jumped, and she had said it was because there was a moon in the water. People had seen her jump into that abandoned well on New North Bridge. After she had been stopped, people had asked her why, and she had said that there was a dragon in that abandoned well. There were many old people of the capital who had not forgotten a scene that often occurred in front of the Li Palace 10 years ago. When Su Yurong was still a little girl, she would often climb up the stone pillars of the Li Palace to look at the sun, laughing happily. The priests of the Li Palace below were both anxious and angry, but they did not dare to do anything. Even when they called for her to come down, their voices were always so gentle. From birth, she had been determined by the divine empress and the Pope to possess the blood of the true phoenix. She was a treasure that the entire capital and the entire Greyjoy had to protect, let alone climbing up the sacred stone pillars of the Li Palace. Even when she frequently beat the Princess of Ping, who was several years older than her, until her face was swollen, the divine empress did not care, let alone these priests of the Li Palace. In short, when she was young, Su Yurong was a mischievous little muddy monkey, a daring and reckless fake boy. No one could have imagined that she would become what she would become later on. At the age of 5, Su Yurong's true phoenix blood awakened. This was 2 years ahead of the time calculated by the divine empress and the Pope. From that day onwards, Su Yurong seemed to become a completely different person. Her white dress was no longer stained with dust, quiet and beautiful. Her personality also became quiet and beautiful. No matter what happened, she was always indifferent and calm. She no longer said nonsense like there was a moon in the canal or a dragon in the abandoned well. She no longer messed around. She began to quietly read, calmly cultivate, and she was still so young. At that time, the common people of the capital would occasionally see her enter the palace, as if they were looking at a real fairy. The capital's fanatical love and even worship for her probably began from that time. As he read the dossier and thought of those scenes, Chen Changsheng became somewhat spellbound. It turned out that when she was young, she had been this sort of person. But why had he not sensed this point in their correspondence? Nor had he sensed the latter part of the praises of the common people of the capital. Looking at the bamboo dragonfly on the bookshelf, he was somewhat confused. After coming to the capital from Xining, far too many things had happened. It was impossible for him to maintain any good feelings towards Su Yurong. Those fantasies that he might have had long since vanished, and they were now opponents. But even so, he had to admit that Su Yurong was truly extraordinary. He didn't understand the moon in the canal, but he knew better than anyone that under the abandoned well at New North Bridge, there really was a dragon. And at that time, she hadn't even been 5? Chapter 5:13. When she was 5 years old, her innate bloodline awakened, and she began to cultivate. She seemed to have randomly found a star to be her fated star, but the brightness of that star could be ranked in the top 3 within 100 years. After a few years, she concluded her studies at the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. The Holy Maiden of the South personally came to the capital and brought back South Stream Temple from the Pope and the Divine Empress. When she arrived at South Stream Temple, her cultivation was still at the meditation realm, but she had already begun to comprehend the heavenly tome monoliths. Moreover, from those notes, it could be seen that she truly understood the heavenly tome monoliths. He and she were the youngest upper-level ethereal opening cultivators in history, but he had relied on a fortuitous encounter in the true blood of the Black Dragon, while she had relied entirely on her own innate talent, bloodline, and comprehension ability. Just like Qiushan Jun, she did not encounter any obstacles in the process of cultivation. As long as she wanted to learn something, she could learn it. Whether it was the amount of true essence, the strength of divine sense, or the Tao techniques and cultivation methods, she was far superior to her peers. She was a true phoenix. Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time. He had no confidence in the battle 7 days later. Now, many people said that he was a genius in cultivation, especially in the sword path. But after seeing Su Yorong's life, he finally understood what a true genius was. Just like what Tang 36 said last year at the Plum Garden Inn, Su Yorong made people speechless. However, just as Tang 36 had said, this battle still had to happen. He represented the Tradition Academy in the Li Palace. Even if he couldn't win, even if he didn't want to fight, he still had to fight. He got up and walked to the wardrobe to get a new towel to wash his face. He was a simple man, but he indulged himself in this aspect. Whenever something big happened, he would wash himself clean and use a new towel. After opening the wardrobe door, he froze in place because he found that a towel was missing. Dozens of towels were stacked neatly. Other than himself, no one would be able to tell that a towel was missing. That night, Su Yurong took a towel and wiped off the snow on the table. He stood quietly in front of the wardrobe for a long time. For some reason, he did not take the towel in the end. He slowly closed the wardrobe door, walked back to the window, and gazed at the imperial palace not far away. She should be in the palace now, right? There were many palaces in the Great Zhou Royal Palace, but only the elders in the royal palace remembered that one of the palaces was reserved for Su Yurong. The location of the palace was somewhat remote and very quiet. Furthermore, there was a particularly good garden, and the scenery outside the window was extremely beautiful. This was a matter that the Divine Empress had decided 10-odd years ago. Later on, when Su Yurong went to Holy Maiden Peak, the Princess of Ping wanted to move to that palace, but her wishes were not fulfilled. At this moment, Su Yurong was sitting in that palace. Outside the window, the snow was falling lightly, and the tree branches were dyed with frost. It was very beautiful, but she was not in the mood to admire the scenery. Her gaze fell on the natal chart in front of her. Her fingers gently slid across the natal chart. As she moved, the complex lines and patterns on the surface of the natal chart also changed. They gathered and dispersed like flowing water, and were as elusive as flowing clouds. Sometimes, it even seemed like a heavenly book. Those lines that followed different trajectories represented countless conditions. At this very moment, they represented the history of the Orthodoxy, the legacy of the Li Palace, the past of the Orthodox Academy, Shang Xingzhou, the Pope, Su Li, that rumored senior brother, Tang 36, Clear Lake Restaurant, and countless other information related to Chen Changsheng. Naturally, the sword styles that Chen Changsheng was most skilled in would not be lacking. The night gradually deepened, but she still calmly gazed at the natal chart, making deductions and calculations. After a very long time, the snow outside the window gradually stopped and the clouds in the night sky scattered. The starlight fell on the snow on the floor of the imperial palace, reflected into the room, and ultimately fell on the natal chart. She stood up, clasped her hands behind her, and walked out of the hall. The natal chart still quietly rested on the table. Under the illumination of the starlight, those moving lines and patterns gradually came to a stop. It was a star chart. This sort of thing repeated itself in the Imperial Palace and the Orthodox Academy for 6 whole days. Chen Changsheng's side was piled high with papers, all of them filled with data and statements. He was so busy that he didn't even have time to take a bath. He was still constantly calculating, exhausted, but increasingly confident. Su Yurong was also constantly using the natal chart to make deductions and calculations. In the end, she obtained 17 star charts, each one of which, without exception, pointed to victory. The atmosphere in the capital grew more and more lively, while the atmosphere in the Imperial Palace and the Orthodox Academy grew more and more tense. Because many people had seen how long Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong had spent preparing for this battle, how much effort they had put into it. After 6 days, it was the 7th day. The 7th day was the day the battle would begin. Not long after the early morning, the rest of the capital quieted down as countless people made their way to the Luo River. The location of the battle between Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong was on the Bridge of Helplessness on the Luo River. In everyone's view, this was the most suitable battlefield. It was not because the Bridge of Helplessness was a famous scenic spot, worthy of this battle that was bound to be recorded in the annals of history, but because of its position. To the west of the Bridge of Helplessness was the Li Palace, and to the east was the Imperial Palace. The distance between the two palaces was exactly the same. Choosing this place as the battlefield, there was undoubtedly a deeper meaning behind it, and it was also fair. Su Yurong had always lived in the Imperial Palace and would probably leave the Imperial Palace soon, but Chen Changsheng didn't leave from the Li Palace, but rather from the Orthodox Academy. As per usual, he woke up at 5, calmed his mind for a moment before opening his eyes. Under Xian Yuan Po's earnest gaze, he ate 2 large bowls of beef noodles. With Su Mo's assistance, he put on the Orthodox Academy's uniform. Whether it was the length of the outer shirt exposed from the collar or the height difference between the hem of the uniform and the upper of the shoes, it perfectly met the most stringent requirements. Tang 36 didn't do anything. He only stood to the side, a toothpick in his hand, incessantly picking at his teeth, while at the same time grumbling about how today's beef stew wasn't soft enough. The gates of the Orthodox Academy slowly opened. Chen Changsheng, accompanied by Tang 36's group and the new students, walked through Hunter Blossom Lane and onto the main street. Then, under the gaze of countless gazes, he walked towards the Luo River. At some point, a bowl of soy milk and 2 youtiao had appeared in Tang 36's hands. Officer Xin, who was waiting on the street, saw this scene and helplessly shook his head, saying, "At such a tense moment, you actually haven't forgotten about this matter." Tang 36 said, "What's there to be nervous about? In any case, only victory and defeat will be decided, not life and death. What's more, delicacies have always been above life and death." For some reason, upon hearing these words, Chen Changsheng's mood became much calmer. But today, the entire capital was destined to not be calm. The news of Chen Changsheng's departure from the Orthodox Academy, along with the slightly chilly winter wind, quickly spread throughout the capital. Chen Changsheng left the 100 Blossom Lane. The students of the Orthodox Academy are all accompanying him. The people of the Li Palace have already caught up with him. They've already arrived at the Ink Lake. They've passed Heavenly Passage Park. Chen Changsheng will soon arrive at the Monastery of the Returning Dragon. Chapter 514. The alley of the Northern Military Department was quiet. The 2 crabapple trees in the courtyard had long since shed all their flowers, but they had received some snow in the last 2 days, so it seemed like a sea of flowers had reappeared. Zhou Tong stood under the crabapple tree and looked at his subordinate kneeling in front of him. He said with some loathing, "Does such a trifling matter need to be reported?" His subordinates were very confused, thinking, this battle between Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng is unquestionably the last major event of the year. So why is His Excellency so indifferent? Since life and death will not be decided, it's a trifling matter. Zhou Tong and Tang 36 had the exact same opinion. After saying this, he turned and entered his room, no longer caring about this matter. Zhou Tong was not paying attention to this battle, but there were many people who were. On the shore of a quiet and secluded snowy lake in the northern part of the city, Tianhai Chenwu was leaning against a railing and gazing at the snow. For some reason, he suddenly thought of that lake outside Clear Lake restaurant, and his mood became rather foul. In the past few days, he had spoken to Su Shiji more courteously than before, because Su Yurong had become holy maiden much earlier than anyone had imagined. But because his mood was rather foul, or perhaps because he was rather nervous, his attitude towards Su Shiji returned to the past, even more unyielding and direct. If you want to rely on the Li Palace, you also have to see if they're willing to let you rely on them. If the Pope forcefully annuls the engagement and the Divine General's estate is once more ridiculed by the common people, what benefit will that bring you? Tianhai Chenwu asked, since this battle is going to be fought in the end, why do you need to do those useless things first? Su Shurji said nothing, his face expressionless, but in reality, he was already furious to the extreme. Tian Haichenwu faintly smiled. Today, let's see how Yurong will help your father vent his anger. There are not many people in the Orthodox Academy, only 100 some in total. But when so many people walked together on the street, their aura was rather astonishing, especially when several thousand people of the capital were walking with them. It was a vast and awe-inspiring sight. Not far past the monastery of the returning dragon was the Luo River, also known as the Luo Canal. Not far ahead, one could already see that famous bridge, but not everyone could cross it. Besides Chun Changsheng, Tang 36, and the accompanying students were all blocked at the entrance to 8 Willows Street. From 8 Willows Street to 4 Direction Street, the area of several li around the Bridge of Helplessness had already been cut off. Unable to enter, the spectating crowd could only stand on the banks of the Luo River. At this time, many people had already arrived. The dense mass of people lined up along the banks of the trees, so far that it seemed impossible to see the end. Everyone was discussing the battle that was about to begin, analyzing who was stronger and who would win. He was completely different from last year. The current Qin Changsheng was no longer the same as before. In the Ivy League gathering, he battled with Go Hanshi's Sword of Words. In the grand examination, he inconceivably obtained first place upon the first banner. In the Mausoleum of Books, he attracted starlight to fall upon the capital. Many people compared him to Wang Jitsu of the past, and there was no need to mention what happened in the Garden of Zhou afterwards, or those battles that occurred on the road back south. Just from the beginning of summer until now, the Orthodox Academy had welcomed countless challenges, and Chun Changsheng had not lost a single one. Even more shocking was that he had consecutively defeated 6 cultivators at the initial level of star condensation. It was only at this point that people finally realized that the seemingly inconceivable feat of surpassing cultivation levels to win was not an accident for him, but something that was to be expected. From being dumbfounded at the beginning to being expected, and even somewhat numb, Chun Changsheng had already given the world far too many shocks. There was even less to say about the other side of this battle. Su Yurong had always been special. Possessing the bloodline of the true phoenix, she was the same as Qiu Shanjun. From the beginning of cultivation, she had already surpassed the scope of the imagination of ordinary people, and in reality, she had also surpassed the scope of her peers. She did not need to participate in the grand examination. She had the right to enter the Mausoleum of Books at any time. In reality, from the age of 10, she had already begun to study the heavenly tomes. Even today, no one knew if she had ever battled with a cultivator at the initial level of star condensation, but many people, including Chun Changsheng, believed without the slightest hesitation that she was absolutely capable of easily accomplishing something that was traditionally extremely difficult to accomplish. If Chun Changsheng could be said to have given the world far too many shocks in this year, then Su Yurong had always been the world's most pleasantly surprised discovery. They've come. Some of the people on the shores of the Luo River discovered the arrival of Chun Changsheng and the people from the Orthodox Academy. They all began to yell, and the scene became very noisy and lively. Some of the people very respectfully greeted him. Some of the people loudly asked questions, but no one cheered for him. Out of the countless voices, not a single "you have to win" could be heard. The news that the 4 great markets sent over is that besides the Orthodox Academy and the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, basically no one else bet on you winning. Even many priests of the Li Palace bet on Su Yurong. Tang 36 looked at him and comforted him. But you can understand this as the will of the people of the capital. It's not a judgment of your strength. Chun Changsheng thought, if it's really like this, it can't really be considered a comfort. He asked Tang 36, then what about you? Tang 36 said, I have confidence in you. This kind of confidence was not blind, and it had nothing to do with friendship or intimacy. Instead, it was recommended on the basis of clear cognition. Tang 36 was very clear that in the previous 7 days, Chun Changsheng had prepared very seriously and painstakingly. Looking at the scene of Chun Changsheng, calculating in his room every day, Tang 36 even felt that there was no one more serious than Chun Changsheng in this world. As long as the stars were still bright, there was no reason for someone as serious as Chun Changsheng to fail. I suggest you bet on me to lose. Chun Changsheng patted his shoulder and then, under the guidance of the priest, walked towards 8 Willow Street. Looking at his back, Tang 36 wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He faintly felt that Tang 36's last words seemed to be pointing at something. Xin Yuan looked at his serious expression and asked in confusion, "Just now, you said that it doesn't matter if it's life or death. Why are you worried now?" "I'm not worried about whether he will lose or not. I'm worried about my silver." Tang 36 turned around and walked out of the crowd. Xin Yuan became even more puzzled and shouted, "What are you going to do?" Tang 36 didn't turn his head and said, "I will go to the 4 great markets to cancel my bets." 8 Willow Street was very quiet. Aside from the priest who led the way, no one else could be seen. And when he reached the side alley that led from 8 Willow Street to the Luo River, the priest also stopped and extended his hand to invite Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng nodded and walked towards the side alley. Not long after, he arrived at the Luo River. Ascending the stairs, he arrived at the bottom of the Bridge of Helplessness. The Bridge of Helplessness was the largest bridge on the Luo River. The bridge was extremely wide, able to carry over 10 carriages side by side. The bridge was very tall but not steep. Compared to other bridges, it was very flat. Standing under the bridge and looking over, one would feel that the bridge was more like a plaza. Chun Changsheng walked onto the bridge, and not long after, he arrived at the very center of the bridge. There was no one on the Bridge of Helplessness, no one on the other side of the bridge, and no one on the other side. Even in the places that he could see, there was no one. It was very spacious and quiet. He stood on the bridge and looked at the flowing water under the bridge. He remembered something. 2 years ago, the pier of the Bridge of Helplessness had been hit by a cargo ship. The imperial court had spent a great deal of money to reinforce it with an array. That array was right under the bridge. Similarly, several of the important water gates of the Luo River had arrays attached to them. Only in this way could the surface of the water not freeze during the bitter winter, allowing the supply ships and merchant ships from the south to pass through as they pleased. But today, many places in the capital were under martial law, especially around the Bridge of Helplessness. The Luo River, which was normally a magnificent sight to behold, was very deserted today. Just like this bridge, there was not a single person, not a single ship. Just as he was thinking of these things, he saw a large ship slowly approaching from the lower reaches. This ship was truly very large. It was probably a military ship of the Great Zhou Navy. The uppermost deck was actually almost parallel to the Bridge of Helplessness. There were many people standing on a large ship, but there were relatively fewer people standing on the uppermost deck. Most of them were people that he recognized. With the soft sound of water, the large ship slowly stopped and dropped its anchor. It was still around a li from the Bridge of Helplessness. Chun Changsheng could clearly see that on the uppermost deck of the large ship stood several fully armored divine generals. He recognized Xue Xingchuan and Fei Dian. Since Xue he had actually returned, Su Shiji would naturally not be missing. There were also the administrators of the Ivy Academies. In the very center was the current principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Zhuang Jihuan. Even further in front were the important figures of the imperial court and the orthodoxy. He saw Mao Qiuyu, Linghai Zhuang, Dao Siyuan, the Minister of Rights, Mo Yu, and Prince Chenlu. But these important figures were still not the people standing at the very front. Standing at the very front of the large ship were 3 painters from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. One of them had once witnessed the battle between Chun Changsheng and Zhou Ziheng, while the other 2 had just rushed over from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. They were both star condensation cultivators. Back in Xuanyang City, when they saw the upper-level star condensation assassin Lu Qing, they found it inconceivable. Then these 3 star condensation painters, Chun Changsheng looked at the people on the ship. The people on the ship looked at him on the bridge. Dao Siyuan said, "Although I've always felt that he's just messing around, he's still the principal of the Orthodox Academy. I just hope that when he loses, he won't look too ugly." On the side, Mao Qiu calmly said, "To speak of victory and defeat before the battle has even begun is too early." On the side, Ling Haizhuang expressionlessly said, "Victory and defeat have already been decided." In the view of these peak star condensation experts who were only a step away from the divine domain, any detail before or during the battle was enough to affect the final outcome. Ling Haizhuang believed that since Chen Changsheng had arrived first, he was doomed to lose. There was still some time before the appointed battle, but he had arrived so early. Perhaps this meant that his mind was not calm enough. Moreover, he was currently standing alone on the bridge of helplessness. Even if he wanted to calm his mind, it would still be very difficult, because he was waiting, and waiting meant being passive. These moments on the bridge required thinking to fill in, but before a great battle, thinking too much was never a good thing. It's not necessarily good, but it's not necessarily bad. Mao Qiu looked in the direction of the bridge of helplessness and calmly said, "Perhaps one's heart is restless and impatient, or perhaps one's mind is calm and tranquil. One must first adapt to the environment. In the end, it all depends on one's temperament." These words were very reasonable. In truth, everyone had their own reasons, but because they had different standpoints and inclinations, the reasons they held and the words they spoke naturally conflicted with each other. Similarly, one could also see from the reasons they held and the words they spoke just what standpoint the people present held. I don't understand cultivation, but based on Principal Chen's past, there's no need to doubt his calmness and patience. The speaker was the Minister of Rites. Many people cast surprised gazes at him, and even Prince Chun Lu turned his body to glance at this high official. It was only now that everyone realized that the Minister of Rites' heart was actually on the side of the old imperial clan. In the Orthodox Academy, Zhixiu gazed out the window at the overcast sky. After a very long period of silence, he finally stood up, took his cane from the wall, and walked out. Just as he walked out of the house, he suddenly felt a little cold on his face. Touching it, he realized that it was snow on the verge of melting. He raised his head to the sky and realized that it had begun to snow again. "It's snowing," someone on the ship said. The fluttering snowflakes caused the people on the ship to stir, and then they fell silent once more. The crowd looked at Chen Changsheng on the bridge, thinking if the snow gets any heavier, it will disturb his mental state. Looking at the falling snow, would Su Yurong come earlier, or would she purposely come later? The snowflakes gradually turned into flakes. It didn't take long for Chen Changsheng's body to be dyed white. The people on the two shores of the Luo River began to open their umbrellas. Tens of thousands of umbrellas opened at the same time, creating a rather spectacular sight. Chen Changsheng could not see this sight, only the snow falling before his eyes. He had already quietly stood on the bridge for a very long time, but just as Ling Haizhuang had judged, his heart was still unable to completely calm down, because he was currently very nervous. To be more precise, he had always been very nervous. From the moment he saw the white crane land on the shore of the Orthodox Academy, he had begun to feel nervous. He had been nervous for so many days, and he was still nervous now. He was not used to this sort of nervous mood. He was well aware that this sort of mood was not good for his body, and it would also affect his performance in battle. As a result, he gradually began to feel nervous. The source of his nervousness and anxiety was naturally this battle, but the primary reason was that his opponent in this battle was her. From Xining village to the capital, far too many things had occurred, and the source of all of it was her. And now, he was finally going to meet her. In the past few days, besides calculating and deducing, he had inevitably thought about what he should say to her when they actually met. He had not thought of it. If he could not think of it, he would not think about it. At this moment, he finally made his decision. He no longer looked at the ship and the people on it, because those were the affairs of the world, too complicated. He also no longer looked at the snow falling from the sky, because snow moved without a trace and was hard to fathom. He gazed at the water under the bridge. The Luo River in the depths of winter was calm, but the water was constantly flowing. Motion and motion were unified in this canal. This was motion and motion as one. He gazed at the bottom of the bridge and threw all his thoughts into the flowing water. He gradually calmed down until he forgot all things and became empty and bright. It was at this moment that Su Yurong arrived. She walked over from the other side of the street, seeming to walk with the wind and snow. She arrived noiselessly, without the slightest disturbance. The wind and snow were very natural things, and her arrival was also a very natural thing. Without alerting anyone, she arrived under the bridge of helplessness. At this moment, Chun Changsheng was standing on the bridge, looking at the scenery of the flowing water. She was looking at the person on the bridge who was looking at the scenery. The white crane flew over from the distance, stirring up snowflakes as it landed on the black eaves of a house behind the bridge. This was a very beautiful scenery. There was another chapter tonight. Chapter 515. That crane cry resounded through the wind and snow, spreading to both shores of the Luo River. The crowd began to stand up, their voices rising from every direction. Some people stood on tiptoe, wanting to get a clearer view of what was happening on the distant bridge, while others simply climbed onto the branches of the scholar trees by the river. However, the trees were already rather brittle in the winter, so how could they bear the weight of so many people? With a crack, some scholar trees snapped, and at least several dozen commoners fell into the cold river. Fortunately, there were many priests of the Li Palace and the Zhou army standing guard today, and there were also boats waiting downstream. It didn't take long for those commoners to be rescued from the river. Their lives were not in danger, but after being struck by the bone-chilling cold of the river, a bout of illness was unavoidable. The match on the bridge of helplessness had not yet begun, and no one had even seen Su Yurong's figure, but the scene was already in chaos. One could imagine just how much anticipation the crowd had for this match. The large ship was somewhat closer to the bridge of helplessness, so the important figures on the ship had already seen the figure beneath the bridge. There was a slight disturbance, and then they quieted down. At this moment, Tang 36 and Zheshio had somehow boarded the ship. After meeting up with Su Moyu, they began to search for a suitable place to watch the match. The captain of the ship was a powerful figure and an elder. No matter how arrogant he was, it was not appropriate for him to cause trouble at a time like this. After looking around, his face suddenly lit up, and he brought the other two to Moyu's side. Moyu glanced at him, but said nothing. Tang 36 gazed at the distant bridge of helplessness and asked, "Are they really going to fight just like this?" Moyu looked at the youth on the bridge and the girl below. She said nothing, her emotions rather complex. This match was a contest between the leaders of the younger generation of the Orthodoxy's northern and southern factions, and also a contest between the Orthodoxy's new and conservative factions. More importantly, this match represented a confrontation between the wills of the Divine Empress and the Pope. On the bridge, Chun Changsheng watched the flowing water, watched the snow fall into the water, and then disappear. The tension and anxiety in his heart were like those snowflakes, gradually vanishing without a trace. He sensed something and turned to look at the snowstorm. This was a simple movement, not heavy, but very slow, because this turn had already taken many years. Through the snowstorm, he saw the girl beneath the bridge. This was the first time he saw Su Yurong, his former fiancée, the owner of those letters and the bamboo dragonfly. Just as he had thought before on the bridge, his life had changed in a way because of this girl. Too many things had happened because of her, but this was the first time they had met. Before meeting her, he had already heard far too many things about her and praises for her, but he would still wonder just what she looked like. Did she have long, black, and beautiful hair? Was she really that beautiful? Right now, he could not see her face, could not see her black hair, but he discovered that the person standing under the bridge in the snow was exactly the same as he had imagined. She wore a white dress and didn't hold an umbrella. Instead, she wore a curtain hat with a gauze hanging down from the brim of the hat, covering her face. He could only vaguely see some of it. It was not clear, but it should be very beautiful. Invisible, but also very beautiful because it was a kind of indescribable beauty. Yes, even if her face was covered by a veil, just by standing there quietly, she made people feel that she was indescribably beautiful. She stood in the snowstorm as if she could disappear with the wind and snow at any time. She didn't belong to this world. She should be alone on a cliff without any trace. Seeing this girl in the snowstorm, Chun Sheng finally understood why Su Shiji and Tang 36 thought that he would change his mind when he saw her. Why Tang 36 said that many people would lose their lives after seeing her, and why she made people speechless. The veil on Su Yurong's face was fluttering in the snowstorm. She was nodding her head in greeting. Sheng nodded his head as a return greeting. He thought he should say something at this time, but the next moment, he realized that he had been thinking too much. The girl in the snowstorm obviously didn't want to say anything. She just stood there quietly. Both sides of the Luo River were silent. Only the sound of the river flowing around the ship could be heard. Even the sound of snow falling could be heard. Everyone, like Chun Sheng, felt that he should say something at this time. They wanted to hear what he and Su Yurong would say before the battle. To the important figures of the imperial court and the Li Palace, this battle on the Bridge of Helplessness might mean many things. The common people of the capital were also well aware of this, but they didn't care too much. Who would inherit the divine empress's authority, who would be the next pope, really didn't have much to do with the lives of ordinary people. After the coup of the 100-Her Garden and the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy, the capital was still the same capital. The people were more concerned about the grudges between the two sides of this battle. Chun Sheng and Su Yurong had an engagement, or perhaps it was as the rumors said, the engagement had been forcefully annulled by the Pope, but none of this could change their relationship. They were originally engaged, should have been husband and wife. This made people sigh with sorrow. Last autumn, because of this engagement, the people of the capital had besieged the Orthodox Academy and cursed Chun Sheng like a dog. They had even invented a special proverb, but after just 1 year, the people of the capital had changed their attitude. They hoped to see this marriage succeed, because in their view, Chun Sheng was already completely worthy of Su Yurong, and he was also a Zhou person. Su Yurong might as well marry him than marry Qiu Shanjun. What the people on both sides of the Luo River were thinking, what they were waiting for, Chun Sheng and Su Yurong didn't know, and probably didn't care. They only calmly stared at each other through the wind and snow, not speaking. For a very long time, they didn't speak. Until the end, he and she didn't speak. The silence of the Bridge of Helplessness, in the end, could not be broken. It was only awakened by a movement. Su Yurong extended her hand and gripped her sword. The sword she used was obviously not a normal sword, but a famous sword. The temple sword of Holy Maiden Peak, after several hundred years, had finally returned to the hands of the current Holy Maiden. Her hand, which gripped the hilt, was very white, somewhat whiter than snow. Chun Sheng did not notice this. He only looked into her eyes, yet he discovered that he could not meet her gaze no matter what. The gauze draped over the curtain hat seemed rather strange. Su Yurong unsheathed the temple sword from its sheath. A sword cry rose from the Bridge of Helplessness, drifting up and down the Luo River. Ripples began to appear on the calm surface of the water, and then the waves became great waves, incessantly slapping against the bow of the ship and the banks of the Luo River. At the same time, countless waves arose in Chun Sheng's sea of consciousness.